steel, firearms, and the Industrialists crossing into another world. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 251: The Battle of Bitauberg 7. The right flank had been defeated. The Kent commanders witnessed a scene they could hardly accept. They had thought their archers could hold their own against the enemy's crossbows, or at least hold out longer. The earlier volley of musket fire had drawn everyone's attention, and then, under the watchful eyes of both sides, the Kent right flank was decimated by a bayonet charge from the Arda. This outcome had a more direct impact on the lower-ranking officers and soldiers. The Kent's morale plummeted instantly, while the Allied morale soared. The deafening sounds of battle resumed, and due to the shift in morale, the Allied forces forced the enemy to retreat. The Arda troops also reloaded their ammunition, turned, and began to slowly advance and fire on the Kent's right flank. Suddenly attacked from the flank, the Kent's morale plummeted even further, with many soldiers turning tail and fleeing. Jace lashed out at an officer who was clearly in a state of panic, yelling furiously, "Go!" Led the reserves to hold off the enemy on the right flank. He had already planned to retreat, but the collapse of the right flank had put him in a semi-encircled predicament, and issuing a retreat order rashly would likely result in a rout. The reserves charged forward, but to Jace's utter dismay, a volley of fire from the Arda crossbows scattered them. Jace had originally planned to use the reserves as second-line troops, their equipment and quality being subpar. Expecting such a force to hold off the Arda was a sign of his desperation. Moreover, the Arda artillery had been relentless, the artillery battery first concentrating its fire to destroy several Kent crossbows, then bombarding their reserves. To minimize casualties, and to prevent these men, who cried out magic after being hit by a few shots, from scattering in disarray, Jace had no choice but to have the reserves lie prone in the grass. Even so, by the time reserves were summoned to reinforce the right flank, the number of soldiers was nearly half of what it had been at the start of the battle. Defeat was inevitable, and Jace ordered a retreat. As expected, apart from the knights and a few elite troops who managed to maintain basic order, most soldiers scattered like headless flies. Earl Parker seized the opportunity to wave his command flag, and the phalanx that had been holding the rear as reserves immediately stepped forward to join the pursuit. Jace, protected by his family knights, fled hastily eastward, while the other lords, large and small, who were allied with the Kent family also fled for their own lives. The Allied forces chased the fleeing soldiers for several miles before withdrawing, and by the time they returned to their camp, it was already evening. Ha ha ha, drink, drink. As night fell, the entire camp was filled with laughter and merriment. Bonfires were lit, and the officers and soldiers around them feasted and drank heartily. Although the ultimate objective of this campaign, Bitauberg, had not yet been captured, today's victory was of great significance, and it would be inexcusable not to celebrate. To celebrate this great victory, the lords and generals unanimously agreed to reward the troops. The Kent army, in its retreat, clearly had no time to clean up its own camps, and all the supplies there went to the Allied forces. While cleaning up the Kent army's camps, some unpleasant incidents occurred between the armies of different territories as they tried to seize more spoils. Earl Price Parker, who had personally led the cavalry in pursuit of the enemy, returned and proposed that the spoils be collected in one place first, and then, after capturing Bitauberg, a fair and mutually beneficial distribution plan be devised through discussion. Due to Earl Parker's prestige, everyone agreed to his proposal. After the battlefield was cleaned up, pigs and sheep began to be slaughtered in the various camps. The lower-ranking soldiers, who usually ate simple foods like black bread, could finally feast on meat tonight. Because of the substantial spoils, and to gain a good reputation and maintain morale, the lords were happy to display their generosity for the entire night. After all, the newly captured pigs and sheep were now considered public property. In the room where the lords and generals gathered, the atmosphere was even more harmonious, with everyone clinking glasses and enthusiastically discussing the day's battle. Lieutenant Colonel Bryce Alder, commander of the Alda Army, became a minor focus of the banquet, given the Alda army's significant contribution to the battle. Everyone had witnessed the Alda army, in a thin three-rank formation, steadily advancing despite arrow streaks, and within minutes crushing the Kent army's right-wing archers, then repelling a counterattack from the enemy reserves. The collapse of the right wing eventually spread to the entire Kent army. "Bryce, let's have a drink." Derek of the Heller family raised his glass, clinking it heavily against Bryce's. "Cheers." Bryce didn't stand on ceremony, and he and Derek drank their respective glasses in one gulp. Today, the Heller family's army benefited greatly from the Alda army. The Portree infantry and Alda infantry formed the left flank of the Allied forces, though they were positioned behind the Alda infantry. When the Alda army attacked, the Portree infantry followed closely behind. When the battle entered melee combat, even they easily dealt with the Kent soldiers, who were terrified by firearms. This battle washed away the shame of the previous defeat caused by Derek's recklessness, so Derek was very grateful to the Alda. Several prominent figures in the Allied forces, including Earl Parker, came to drink with Bryce. Although many of them still maintained the haughty attitude of nobles towards commoners, their tone was much softer than when they first met. Undoubtedly, today's battle had proven to the northwestern territories that Lacquer Town possessed a powerful armed force. Not only were their weapons superior, but their officers and soldiers were also of extremely high quality. Some generals who had participated in the suppression of the rebellion last year secretly compared them to the elite troops directly under the Royal Guard and were surprised to find that this force was already superior. However, there was another significant drawback: the number of men was too small. A force of 1,000 was barely enough to occupy even a moderately large town. And who knew how many more such troops Lacquer Town held? They would have to think carefully when dealing with that exiled family that ruled the most remote part of the Northwest. Bryce, though quite confident in his drinking capacity, was somewhat tipsy. Logically, as a commander, he shouldn't have drunk so much, but since the drinkers were local lords, it was a problem. They couldn't afford to strain their relationship with the Griles family. To handle this, only Bryce of the two battalion commanders attended the banquet. Joyce, feigning injury, didn't come. He had been shot in the arm during the day's fighting, but fortunately, it wasn't serious. In case of any emergency, Joyce would take command of the troops in Bryce's place. Chapter 252. Going home to farm? Not a chance. The day after the battle, the Allied lords discussed how to capture Bitdor Castle. Before they could finish, several men emerged from the castle, led by a knight carrying a white flag, claiming to represent his lord, Sir Bright Sean, to negotiate. During the previous day's battle, the castle's inhabitants had anxiously awaited the outcome. A victory for the Kent army would relieve them of the siege. However, fate had other plans. A continuous rumbling sound came from the east, followed by the sight of the Allied army returning triumphantly to their camp, celebrating with a night of jubilation. The Allied forces even deliberately planted the tattered banners of the Kent family and other vassal families in front of Bitdor Castle, a show of force to the inhabitants. It was obvious to anyone with a brain that the Kent army had suffered a defeat, and the inhabitants of Bitdor Castle were now trapped. Including the garrison and nearby villagers, the fort was crammed with over 1,000 people, all eating, drinking, and relieving themselves. After such a long siege, their food supplies were dwindling. In a few more days, even without an Allied attack, they would starve to death. Sir Bright Sean was forced to surrender. However, as a nobleman, he needed a dignified outcome, so he sent his retainers to negotiate. After some bargaining, an agreement was reached. 1. The alliance recognized and supported the Sean family's continued undisputed rule over Bitdor Fort and its dependent territories. 2. The Sean family would secede from the Kent family and join the anti-Kent alliance. 3. The Sean family would pay 6,000 alder gold coins or equivalent as compensation, with 2,000 to be paid initially and the remaining 4,000 to be paid over the next 4 years. 4. The defense of Bitdor Fort would be taken over by the Allied forces until the Kent family was defeated. 5. The migration of their people to other territories would not be hindered. This clause was proposed by Blaze, representing Alder. Although reluctant, Viscount Sean signed the papers. The fact that he wasn't stripped of his title or ceded territory was already a respectable outcome. At 2 p.m., the gates of Beethoven Castle slowly opened. Under the watchful eyes of the Allied forces, Derek Heller led 1,000 men into the castle, confiscated the weapons of the garrison, and dismissed the soldiers and civilians. Viscount Sean was left with only 20 personal guards and 15 family knights. At 3 p.m., other lords and generals from the Allied forces led additional troops into the castle, controlling every corner and completing the occupation of Beethoven Castle. In the following days, besides guarding against a potential counterattack from the Kent family, the lords also argued daily about how to distribute the spoils. Bryce and Joyce did not participate in the competition for the spoils. Because the Arda army had displayed formidable strength in battle, many secretly courted them, doing everything they could to win them over. Prisapark and Dara Keller privately assured them that they would not be treated unfairly. After several days of reconnaissance, the Allied forces discovered that the Kent family, aside from strengthening the defenses of towns bordering their territories, showed no signs of troop build-up. At a meeting, someone suggested, "It seems the Kent family won't be making any moves for the time being. It's time to withdraw." Bryce was puzzled. "In that case, shouldn't we press our advantage and attack?" The other person shook their head. "The soldiers are eager to go home to work. Continuing the fight will lead to a mutiny." Others chimed in. "Yes, the fighting will definitely continue, but we need to deal with this spring planting first." "I imagine the Kent family is doing the same." Bryce then realized that unlike the current Alda army, these lords' troops, including knights and soldiers, were temporarily conscripted. Although serving one's lord unpaid was an obligation for knights and subjects, it was also time-limited. Beyond a certain period, the lord would have to pay his soldiers, which would obviously be a painful blow to the already impoverished lords of the Northwest. During their stay at Bittoburg, apart from the Arda army, everyone in the Allied forces schemed off supplies from their own supply points. Coupled with the lord's rewards after the victory, everyone made a small fortune, further fueling the soldiers' eagerness to return home. Later events finally led to the decision to withdraw. The Kent family sent envoys to negotiate the ransom of prisoners. Earl Parker had previously stated that the ransom would be discussed after the battle, so everyone agreed that the Kent family's renewed mention was a test, whether to continue fighting or to temporarily cease hostilities. The Allied forces also seemed inclined to truce, so they tacitly agreed to the ransom with the envoys, but neither side mentioned signing any formal contract. In other words, once this period of fighting was over, they would resume hostilities. Bittoburg was then garrisoned by the Malkin and Johnston families, while troops from other territories were dismissed and returned home. It was agreed that they would regroup in May and launch an attack on the Kent family's territories. Bryce and Joyce also led their troops back to Arda, accompanied by many former residents of Bittoburg, who had brought their families. In the past few days, everyone in the area knew of this gentleman's army that didn't rob the common people and paid for their goods. If the army was like this, then the Lord of Arda must be quite capable. Moreover, the news that the Lord of Bittoburg was going to pay the Allied forces a large sum of money had somehow spread far and wide, with the amount becoming increasingly outrageous, rising from 6,000 gold coins to tens of thousands. This terrified the residents of Bittoburg. The Lord would surely have to plunder them for the compensation. Therefore, fleeing became a natural course of action. As for their destination, was there a better choice than Arda? Sir Sean, still under house arrest, was powerless to stop this. Besides being bound by the newly signed agreement, he had no troops to prevent it. Frustrated, he could only vent his anger on his servants in his house every day. The Arda army had largely achieved its objectives, ensuring the security of the region between Bittoburg and the coastline, and establishing a defensive perimeter for the trade routes to the south. What to do next? Like other lords, lay low for a month? Of course not. The soldiers of the Arda army didn't need to work in the fields, they trained daily to kill the enemy more efficiently. Bryce leisurely rode his horse, listening to Joyce read a letter from the general staff. The letter devoted most of its length to praising their performance in battle, greatly boosting the prestige of the Arda and Bayhorn lords and strengthening their influence within the alliance. However, the last paragraph was the key, and it greatly excited Bryce. The 1st Infantry Battalion, the 2nd Infantry Battalion, and the Artillery Company, upon arriving in Arda, were stationed at the border, ready to advance on Emden at any time. The two battalion commanders exchanged a smile. It was time to truly wash away last year's humiliation. Chapter 253 The Bishop's Visit. Useless trash, a deafening roar echoed through the hall. Inside the Duke's mansion in Sent City, the place where Duke Ferdinand's birthday celebrations had been held, a group of people were gathered. Seated at the head of the hall was Count Malzkend, Duke Ferdinand's heir. On either side sat vassals of the Kent family and former vassals of Duke Ferdinand, who now consider Maltz their lord. The count's eyes were wide with fury as he glared at a man kneeling below, his son, Jace Kent. Jace knelt motionless, head bowed, bearing his father's wrath. Our family's illustrious name will end in your hands. Maltz Kent was heartbroken. This defeat was an unbearable blow. How many enemies had suffered under the painstakingly cultivated strength of his ancestors. Through arduous struggle, they had finally established themselves as the second most powerful family in the Northwest Bay. Whenever he recalled the family's glorious history, a surge of pride welled up within Maltz Kent. Now, his own son had shattered that pride. An army of over 8,000 men, routed in a single battle, with only a mere 2,000 escaping with Jace, it was utterly shameful. What would people think of his family now? A pretty but fragile vase? A torrent of negative descriptions flooded Maltz Kent's mind. You said the enemy had crossbows, so I specially assigned you over 1,500 archers trained for years. And you good for nothing, have squandered them all. Maltz Kent angrily berated his son, his face contorted with deep pain. Not only had their unseen prestige been destroyed, but their real military strength had also been ruined by his son. Although this archer unit originally belonged to Duke Ferdinand, as the Duke's heir and the de facto ruler of Cent, it effectively belonged to him as well. Unlike ordinary ragtag soldiers, this archer unit trained for 2 afternoons every week. Losing such elite troops was a painful blow to him. Seeing his uncle about to continue his tirade, Emerson Wilder, the royal representative, quickly stood up and advised, "Uncle Kent, anything can happen on the battlefield. I'm sure Cousin Jace has already reflected deeply. Now that we've suffered a setback, we can't afford to panic." After Emerson spoke, the others in the hall echoed his sentiments. Maltz Kent sat back down, sighed softly, and asked, "Any news from Jingai Ao?" Emerson cautiously replied, "Not yet. The royal family is busy dealing with a rebellion in the south. They probably can't attend to things in the northwest. HMPH. I hope they can't. If His Majesty the King interferes again, who knows when we'll finally deal with these troublemakers." Although they had suffered a defeat, he was absolutely confident that the outcome of a war ultimately depended on the overall strength of both sides. The Count gradually calmed down, somewhat regretting his earlier outburst. He was about to become a duke. He should have kept his emotions in check. He softened his tone and said to Jace, "Very well, my child. As little Emerson said, anything can happen on the battlefield. I can tolerate a temporary setback. Get up." Jace then stood up and silently walked to the side, giving Emerson a grateful look as he passed. "Father, please allow me to gather another army. I must personally wash away this humiliation." "No rush. Send someone to scout the situation first. On one hand, we need time to figure out how to deal with the crossbows and thunderhammers. On the other hand, spring planting is imminent, not the right time for war." After the meeting with his vassals concluded, Maltz Kent received an unexpected guest, Bishop Leonard of the Northwest. This greatly surprised the Earl. This bishop usually stayed in the church preaching and rarely associated with nobles like them. What could have prompted him to visit? Could it be? A bad feeling crept into the Earl's mind. He quickly summoned a trusted guard and instructed, "Keep an eye on my young friend, and also on our Duke." Watching the guard's departing figure, the Earl reassured himself, "It's all right, I'm always so careful." He went to a small reception room and instructed a servant to lead his guest there. Leonard followed the servant into the reception room and immediately saw Maltz Kent already waiting for him inside. The Duke's heir stood up and said, "Welcome, welcome. Your presence, Bishop, has bathed the entire Duke's mansion in God's glory." "Your Excellency is too kind," Leonard replied, bowing slightly. "The glory of the Lord of Light shines upon each of us." Even as a regional bishop, he had to be cautious in the face of Maltz Kent, who was about to become the largest secular lord of the Northwest Bay. The two took their seats, and Leonard suddenly felt a chill. Although the other man wore a smile and a fireplace burned in the reception room, Leonard felt a coldness both physically and mentally. This feeling was especially pronounced when he looked at the Earl. He had met this man several times before, but this time, in close proximity, he found the Earl to be quite different. What kind of person was this? A lean face, a well-trimmed beard, and an inherent calm and dignified air. In these aspects, he was no different from any other middle-aged nobleman. One thing was puzzling: the Earl's complexion wasn't the rosy glow of a healthy person, but rather the pallor of someone seriously ill. However, His eyes were incredibly bright and piercing, as if they could breathe fire. Looking at those eyes alone, no one would doubt that the Earl was a vigorous and energetic man. Such contradictory characteristics in one person were truly strange. "Your Excellency, what brings you here?" The Earl's question brought Leonard back to his senses. "Oh, my apologies." He carefully chose his words and slowly said, "I have indeed come to disturb your Excellency with something." "Your Excellency, please speak," Maltzkant said, maintaining his amiable tone. Leonard stated his purpose. "Could you arrange for me to meet with His Excellency the Duke?" "Oh," Earl Maltzkant narrowed his eyes. Chapter 254. Chapter 251. What brings you to see His Excellency the Duke, Archbishop Leonard? Earl Kent asked with a smile, but the smile sent a chill down the bishop's spine. "I've come regarding some religious matters in the Northwest Bay, which I need to discuss with His Excellency the Duke." "Oh, that's easy. Due to health reasons, His Excellency the Duke has entrusted all affairs to me. After all, I am his heir. You can simply tell me what you need." Leonard hesitated. "Well, I still need to see His Excellency the Duke." Earl Kent's face turned cold. "His Excellency the Duke is unwell and unable to receive guests," Leonard persisted. "Then I will visit the Duke, Your Excellency the Archbishop." A dangerous glint appeared in Maltzkant's eyes. "Perhaps you have another purpose in coming here? Have you heard some rumors? The so-called Duke's secret letter that leaked from Henry's hands was causing him a great deal of trouble in the Northwest Bay. The letter accused him of using witchcraft to control Duke Ferdinand. Well, it's true. That's why he would absolutely not allow Duke Ferdinand to meet anyone he shouldn't, including Bishop Leonard before him." Leonard looked at Maltzkant and said, "The innocent are innocent, the guilty are guilty. Your Excellency, what are you afraid of?" Indeed, Leonard had come to the Duke's mansion to investigate Maltzkant's alleged witchcraft, just as he had done when he visited Paul Gleman in Arda. Actually, given his current status, he didn't need to personally handle such matters, but since the other party was the future Duke of the Northwest, he had to be cautious. "HMPH, this is an insult to my reputation." Maltzkant abruptly stood up. "My Kent family has always been loyal to Duke Ferdinand, as the entire Northwest Bay has witnessed. Now you dare to slander my reputation based on baseless accusations fabricated by some traitors of the Ferdinand family. Please forgive me, Your Excellency, whether it is slander or not, I can tell at a glance." "You?" Maltzkant immediately felt the urge to throw the man before him into jail, but the Archbishop's status calmed him down. His face stiffened as he stared intently at Archbishop Leonard, shouting, "Guards, show him out." Two fully armed guards rushed in, their voices gruff as they addressed Leonard. "Your Excellency, this way." Leonard sighed, slowly rising to his feet, and said, "Your Excellency, I will continue to request permission to visit the Duke. If I still cannot obtain your permission, I will have no choice but to report to my superiors." The Earl scoffed inwardly. "HMPH, such threats might work on those minor lords, but to use them on me, the heir to the Duke, is utterly ridiculous." He had long heard that the newly appointed bishop was rigid and lacked social skills, and now it seemed that was indeed the case. "Regardless of what you do next, I will appeal to the Archbishop of the Kingdom and even the Holy See. You, as the protagonist of this region, have groundlessly accused a future Duke, severely damaging his reputation," Maltzkant declared righteously. "Furthermore, protagonist Leonard, haven't you heard of the Gleman family's fire crossbow and thunderhammer? That's definitely witchcraft. My army just suffered a great loss against this witchcraft, and thousands can testify to it." Leonard shook his head and said, "Your Grace, the so-called fire crossbow and thunderhammer are merely two advanced weapons. And their official names are musketeers and cannons. When I was the abbot of the North Shore Monastery in Lacaher Town, I examined them with a magic detecting stone and found no trace of magic. Moreover, Earl Gleman was upright and immediately agreed to the examination after I requested it." Maltzkant's eyes darted around, and he asked eagerly, "You've examined the fire crossbow and thunder hammer, then?" Leonard immediately said, "I only know that there are no magical traces on it, and I know nothing about its internal structure and manufacturing method." "Please don't overthink it, Your Excellency," Earl Kent snorted coldly. "I think it's because Paul Gleman is from your hometown that you're deliberately protecting him. I swear to the Lord of Light, no need for further words. Please return." Earl Kent turned and left. Leonard shook his head and followed the guard out. Earl Kent went to his study and summoned Jace, Emerson, and several other confidants. "We can't wait any longer, we must act as soon as possible." 2 days later, a major event occurred in Sand City. Duke Ferdinand passed away. The Duke had been suffering from illness since last year, and now he had finally received God's blessing. Perhaps it was a good thing for him, that's what many people thought. As the Duke's heir, Malchkent held a grand funeral for him. Before those who came to attend the funeral, the Earl said with deep sorrow, "A model of a kind and benevolent nobleman has entered the embrace of the Lord. Let us carry on his will, end the chaos in the Northwest Bay as soon as possible, and restore a peaceful and stable homeland to the people living here." When the Duke's coffin was lowered into the ground, many noticed that the one who read the eulogy was not Bishop Leonard of the Northwest, but a clergyman with an unfamiliar face. With Duke Ferdinand gone, Malchkent naturally became the new Duke of the Northwest. Upon assuming the throne, he immediately announced to the entire Northwest Bay that he would resolutely eliminate the rebels led by Price Parker. However, his first targets were others. The very next day after Malchkent's accession, a large contingent of fully armed soldiers surrounded the cathedral in Sent. The people inside the cathedral were terrified, ordinary believers huddled in corners, trembling, while a few priests bravely stepped forward. "What are you doing? This is the sanctuary of the Lord of Light, no disrespect allowed." The leading knight shoved aside the priest blocking his way and shouted, "Someone has reported that certain high-ranking clergy in the Northwest Diocese are guilty of treason and interference in secular affairs. We're here to search for evidence." Attack! His soldiers stormed into the church, quickly taking over every part of the interior and ransacking it. These soldiers were illiterate, they simply took anything they deemed suspicious. Under the threat of gleaming swords and spears, no one dared to stop them. Leonard, the protagonist, emerged from the commotion, trembling with rage. "Malchkent, you have some nerve." His room was also searched. Seeing his private, beautifully bound copy of the Holy Scripture, a gift specially printed for him by Paul Gleman, being roughly handled by the soldiers, the old bishop fainted, his eyes rolling back in his head. The surrounding priests were thrown into chaos. Meanwhile, at the Inquisition's headquarters in the suburbs, the church personnel were disarmed, and several rebellious church knights were killed on the spot. The church's armed forces in the Northwest Bay were small and no match for the power of a duke. The surrounding army claimed that there were traitors within the church, and that the Inquisition's armed forces might be manipulated into carrying out treachery, so they had to disarm them before investigating the matter thoroughly. Chapter 255. The small town of Birchuaya was the capital of the earldom of Baldon. Last September, Earl Gennard, who ruled Baldon, faced a rebellion from his vassals. However, his sworn brother, Earl Gleman of neighboring Arda, personally led an army and crushed the ambitions of 4 rebels in one fell swoop. The battle took place outside Birchuaya. Many heard a thunderous roar, and then Birchuaya changed hands. Since then, the Arda army has taken over the city, and the 2 sworn brothers reached an agreement that the Arda Council would oversee the administration of both territories. Some might have thought, Baldon has been annexed by Arda, but most Baldon residents initially didn't feel anything bad about it. After all, they were destined to work and pay taxes anyway. What difference did it make who was the lord? But gradually, more and more people sensed that Baldon was different from before. First, a group of government officials were sent from Lakeside Town, and with the cooperation of the Arda army stationed there, they carried out a crackdown, arresting a large number of local ruffians and sending them to work in the mines. Following this, a large number of exorbitant taxes were abolished. The official explanation was that these taxes had been secretly established by the former chief administrator, Angelo, one of the vassals who participated in the rebellion, behind Count Garnard, and that Count Garnard and his deceased father had been deceived by this wicked man. The residents of Birchuaya were overjoyed. Previously, they had to pay taxes for weddings, funerals, carrying extra goods in and out of the city, and so on. Even growing a long beard incurred a tax. While each tax wouldn't empty the purse, the sheer number of taxes was overwhelming. Now, things were much better. They could finally have some money to spare. After the new administrative system was established, merchants and wealthy families of all sizes flocked to the Lord's mansion. Rumors spread that commerce and industry would be revitalized, and trade would be vigorously developed. Recruitment notices were posted throughout the city, supposedly for the opening of factories, offering very attractive salaries, which drew many applicants. The Garnard family's iron and coal mines also expanded the production, absorbing a large influx of labor. Due to tax reforms, the small town of Birchuaya gradually began to attract merchants from other regions. They brought a wealth of goods from elsewhere and took away local specialties such as canned goods and paper from Baldon. Actually, These weren't exactly local specialties, as neighboring Arda also produced these items, but clearly, Arda's production capacity couldn't meet the needs of these out-of-town merchants. With the abundance of imported goods, competition among similar items led to decreasing prices, improving the quality of life for bourgeois residents. Overall, these changes were welcomed by the people. However, there were a few less pleasant changes. For example, a series of new regulations were introduced, considered too restrictive, especially the heavy penalties for littering and urinating in public, which severely impacted many in the town. But overall, the changes were progressing in a positive direction. In the main hall of the Baldwin Lord's mansion, two people were enjoying dinner at a large table. Seated at the head of the table was Lord Myron Garnard, Lord of Byron. Beside him sat Baron Andrew, who had recently returned to his territory and was now the only remaining vassal of the Garnard family. Last year, Baron Andrew led Byron's armed forces south to defend the king, joining Princess Catherine's campaign against the rebels. Due to his outstanding performance in the recapture of the capital, he and his soldiers were spared when the granary burned and the royal army disbanded. When Lacquerheart town first took over Byron, its control was weak, and it was very worried that this battle-hardened baron might cause trouble upon his return. Therefore, at Paul's instruction, Myron wrote a letter to Baron Andrew. The letter briefly mentioned the rebellion of the four shameless vassals, emphasizing that it was a joke and would be crushed in no time, so Andrew had nothing to worry about. At the end of the letter, Myron, in the name of the Lord, requested that Andrew assist the royal family until the rebellion was quelled, to demonstrate the Garnard family's unwavering loyalty to the monarchy. Andrew then realized that Angelo and others' strong recommendation for him to lead the army south was likely a ploy to lure him away, allowing these schemers to act more easily by sending their loyal vassal, the Garnard family's soldiers, far away. Should he remain under the princess's command or return to protect his lord? Andrew struggled internally. He harbored great ambitions and longed to achieve glory on the battlefield, but he felt deeply guilty for not being by his lord's side when he was in danger. Although the rebellion had been crushed with the help of the Earl's sworn brothers, there was no guarantee that something else might happen in the future. After much deliberation, Andrew decided to stay. He was unwilling to return to the Northwest Bay after just beginning to make a name for himself. After meeting with Hansel, who had come to the capital on business, Andrew felt relieved. According to the royal representative, the Earl was doing quite well lately and didn't need his concern. However, just as he was preparing to accompany the princess south to quell the rebellion, news arrived from the northwest that the Kent family was at war with the Anti-Kent Alliance, and Byron had joined the Anti-Kent Alliance with Arda. Andrew, of course, knew what kind of people the Kent family were, and couldn't help but worry about his homeland and his lord. He felt he had already failed in his duty during the previous rebellion by Angelo and others, and the news of the renewed fighting in the Northwest Bay made him even more uneasy. Therefore, the Baron bid farewell to the princess and, with his Byron soldiers, embarked on his journey home. Back in Byron, he discovered that Paul Gleman next door had done more than just help his sworn brother crush the rebellion. Mellon and Andrew ate in silence, neither was a talkative person, and the atmosphere in the hall remained heavy. "My lord," Andrew suddenly looked up at his lord. "What is it? Since my return, I felt there are many things that are amiss." "Oh. Tell me." Andrew paused, then said, "Allowing Arda's administrative council to govern both territories is highly inappropriate. My lord, please forgive my bluntness, but how is this situation any different from making you a vassal of the Grammy family? Anything else? There's also the issue of Byron's defense. Having soldiers from other territories guard your own, can you sleep soundly at night?" As he said this, Andrew's eyes widened, looking incredulous. Chapter 256. Mellon listened silently to Andrew's tale. The vassal had spent a long time recounting matters of family honor and noble dignity. In short, he felt it was beneath the dignity of the Garnard family for the Arda Council to manage Byron. Andrew, the young earl, put down his knife and fork, looking at his vassal. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He hadn't expected to have such a loyal subject. From Baron Andrew's tone, he could tell the man wasn't feigning loyalty. Since the betrayal last year, Mellon had learned to discern the true meaning behind others' words. "The Garnard family is truly fortunate to have someone like you loyal to them, Your Excellency. Please don't say that. The Valen family would never betray the oath of our ancestors. I am pleased and grateful for your loyalty, but I have no intention of changing the status quo." Mellon's words were not unexpected by Andrew. He had long suspected this would be the outcome, but a sense of resentment still lingered within him. Why? Are you just going to watch yourself be sidelined? How, sidelined? Actually, I haven't personally governed the territory since I ascended the throne, have I? Hearing his lord speak like this, Andrew blushed. Although he knew the count was referring to the traitor Angelo and his ilk, a sense of guilt welled up inside him. While he was undoubtedly loyal, he had been too engrossed in military affairs and paid too little attention to what was happening in Ushuaia City. He hadn't even noticed that Angelo and his group were secretly sidelining their lord. When someone recommended him to fight in the south, he went without a second thought. If he had been more attentive, he wouldn't have had to rely on outsiders to quell the rebellion. Andrew lowered his head and said, "As a vassal of your family, I bear a great responsibility. Please punish me, Your Excellency." "No, Andrew, I have no intention of holding you responsible. Ultimately, I was too young and easily manipulated by Angelo and his ilk." Myron shook his head and said, "Andrew, think about the current situation. Over the past few years, Angelo and his men have planted their own people throughout Bayhorn. After their defeat, these people were either arrested or fled. If Alda hadn't sent people, Bayhorn would likely have quickly descended into chaos. Besides, in the few days since you returned, haven't you noticed that my people are living better lives than before?" Baron Andrew nodded slightly. From what he had seen in the past few days, at least in Ushuaia City, things were better than before. Myron continued, "Moreover, the garnered family's businesses not only suffered no losses, but actually increased significantly with Baron's technical support, earning profits several times higher than before, even exceeding the tax revenue from the territory 2 years ago. Oh, congratulations, Andrew. I advise you to invest in factories as well, otherwise, once you open more and more factories, the money won't come in as quickly as it does now. Thank you for your kindness, I'll consider it. Furthermore, Paul has shown me great respect. He consults me on every decision Baron makes, lets me review the quarterly tax reports, and informs me of and approves of every tax expenditure. Think of those in history who have had similar experiences. Didn't they all drive away the wolves only to invite the tigers in return?" Andrew thought to himself, if you had said no a few more times, Paul Gleman probably wouldn't have been so respectful. But then he heard Myron say, "And you, Andrew, go back to your fiefdom tomorrow. The fiefdoms of those 4 traitors have been stripped away. With my permission, Lackahur Town has sent officials to these places to manage them directly. Only your fiefdom remains unchanged. It is still managed by your family, and no taxes or produce have been taken from it." Andrew had already confirmed this through his correspondence with his family, without Myron needing to say it. "Yes, I am very grateful to Earl Gleman for that, but, alright, Andrew, you should be aware of the current situation. Leaving aside the fact that Paul and I are sworn brothers, the very real threats force us to unite." Andrew guessed, "You mean the Kent family? If that infamous Malx Kent is allowed to rise to power, it will be a disaster for the Northwestern Territories." Unexpectedly, Myron shook his head. "No, it is indeed an imminent threat, but in the long run, it's not just this one. Andrew, you went to the south. What are your thoughts on the situation in the kingdom, and even the entire continent?" Myron's words slightly surprised Andrew. He hadn't expected the Earl to ask him such a profound question. This young man was still a minor, and he himself was merely a lower-ranking nobleman. It seemed somewhat ridiculous for 2 people like him to discuss the kingdom's situation or the turmoil on the continent. "Your Excellency, I," Andrew coughed, likely to cover his embarrassment. He had only gone south to fulfill his battlefield ambitions and hadn't considered such matters. "Just tell me what you know. For example, how long do you think it will take to quell the rebellion in the south?" Andrew frowned, seemingly hesitant, before finally saying, "To be honest, I think the process of suppressing the rebellion might be quite tortuous. Why? Not to mention that Grand Duke Greedwolf himself is very powerful. When I was in the capital, everyone was privately saying that the Grand Duke seemed to have foreign forces supporting him. Moreover, a lot of bad news came from the south. It seems that those lords loyal to the royal family have already been dealt with. In other words, the royal army will be locked in a stalemate with the rebels in the south for some time. That's very likely. Even if the royal family gathers loyal troops from all over the country, there are quite a few lords who follow Giles." Hearing Andrew's words, Myron's fingers tapped lightly on the table, his eyes fixed on the flickering candlelight, lost in thought. "For a long time, the most powerful force in our country has been the royal family. His Majesty the King is the supreme arbiter among all the lords, and the object of our common loyalty. What maintains this loyalty, besides the oath sworn by our ancestors when they were granted their titles, is the sword and shield in His Majesty's hand. His Majesty's sword is sharper than ours, and His Majesty's shield is stronger than ours. He controls the most powerful force in the kingdom. What do you mean? If such a force is tied down in one place for a long time, it means that this country is about to lose or has already lost its order, because the force that maintains order is declining. Even if it is still the most powerful, it is declining at a speed that others can see. Andrew's eyes widened. Even though he had been on the battlefield, he was stunned by Melon's words. This was extremely disrespectful, especially coming from the mouth of a 15-year-old boy. Lord Garnard, are you saying Alder is heading towards chaos? That's what I think. Take the recent events in the Northwest Bay, for example. If the royal family were still as powerful as it was in history, would the two factions still be at war? No, they wouldn't. 100 years ago, would lords fight amongst themselves over disputes? And the royal family's reaction wouldn't be so slow. Even you knew about it and returned to the Northwest, yet there hasn't been a single official statement from the royal family. Myron stared into Andrew's eyes and whispered, "The royal family is hesitating. The royal family is observing. The royal family is worried that its current strength is not enough to quickly quell this, further exposing its weakness. Therefore, Andrew, we need to stay with like-minded people to protect ourselves when chaos comes. The closer we are, the safer we are." The young count's words moved Andrew deeply. It seemed that his lord had matured considerably after the great upheaval. Regardless of whether his words were correct or not, at least he hadn't thought of this. "Lord Garnard, what can I do for you?" After spending some time in Lake Town, I had a feeling that my sworn brother seemed to be establishing some kind of new order. Let's use the term for now, because I don't know how to describe it precisely. And we, Barden, should take advantage of our early start and occupy an important position in the new order. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257 March. Paul Gleman recently received an unexpected windfall. His sworn brother, Myron Garnard, recommended a general to him, Baron Andrew Byron. He had heard of the Baron last year during the suppression of the rebellion at Barden. Angelo and his men had used the pretext of defending the king to send him away out of fear of this loyal and valiant vassal. This Baron had loved leading troops since childhood, and as a child he went to the Eastern Highlands to guard the kingdom's borders, experiencing countless conflicts and battles with barbarians. It was there that he earned his knighthood. After joining the Arda army, his military prowess would be second only to the old knight Scrutter, who served as chief of staff. Baron Andrew Byron had brought back over 400 soldiers from the south. With a few more reinforcements, they could form a battalion. This saved the staff considerable trouble, as these 400 men had considerable experience in the military and had seen blood on the southern battlefields, giving them a significant advantage over the raw recruits. According to the plan given by the general staff, a number of officers were to be sent to supplement the newly established Baildon battalion, and they were to be reorganized according to Arden's rules, followed by 3 months of basic training. Andrew was initially unconvinced. "My men have fought real battles against the rebels in the south. Their battlefield experience is far superior to yours. These country bumpkins who have only fought pirates," he thought. This elite should be immediately taken to the battlefield to test their skills against the Kent family's army. However, after Scrutter showed him the 2nd Infantry Battalion's parade and musket-firing drills, he could no longer be arrogant. The Arda soldier's temperament and quality were truly far superior to his own, and the weapons called muskets further enhanced their combat effectiveness. So Andrew obediently accepted the reorganization and training plan, and even personally disciplined a few troublemakers. The 4th Infantry Battalion was thus born. Paul, based on his military knowledge brought from Earth, had suggested breaking up Baron's troops and integrating them with other units. However, Schroeder and others dissuaded them, firstly because this might create resentment among Melon and Andrew, and secondly because the battalion was still small. Officers trained at the Gremlin Military Academy could be easily assigned. After a week of rest on the border, the 1st and 3rd Infantry Battalions received their long-awaited orders to march on Emden. The entire force of 2 battalions, along with their artillery battery, stormed into Kent family territory. How dare you? Don't you know this is Kent family territory? I warn you, the great Duke Malps Kent will punish you. A Kent family steward stationed in a town along the way blocked their path and shouted angrily. Bryce, riding a tall horse, politely said to him, Sir, please step aside. Don't you know the Kent and Bryles families are at war? The steward still refused to move, his face taut, and shouted again, I warn you, the great Duke Malps Kent. But before he could finish, he was shoved into a stinking ditch by the roadside by Bryce's guards. The steward's disheveled appearance drew laughter from the surrounding crowd, but after he struggled to climb out, the crowd instantly fell silent. Bryce pointed his riding crop at him, making him tremble with fear. Go back and tell your master that the Arda army has come to avenge the Kent family's humiliation last year, having met his match, but seeing that the other party didn't intend to harm him, the steward, unsure whether he was lucky or unlucky, shrank back and stammered, Yes, I will certainly relay the truth. Then he turned and ran away. Watching the flustered figure ahead, Bryce triumphantly cracked his whip. Keep going. The Kent family had many vassals, and the Alda army's march would traverse the territories of several families. However, as nobles, they were well informed and knew the outcome of the Battle of Bitdoberg. Most, believing they couldn't defeat the Alda army, had fled to Sent City with their accumulated wealth long ago upon hearing news of the Alda army's southward advance. However, there were some formidable opponents. These minor lords rallied their knights and militia, attempting to fight the Alda army to the bitter end with their castles. But these rural lords' castles were no match for the cannons of the artillery company. The artillery company carried large-caliber mortars specifically designed for attacking fortified fortresses and walls, originally intended for large castles like Bitdoberg. Unexpectedly, the Lord of Bitdoberg surrendered before they even had a chance to use them, so testing them on these small rural lords' castles was a good idea. The cannons previously manufactured by Arda, classified as cannons, had high muzzle velocities and low trajectories. Therefore, they were ineffective against enemies hiding behind fortified city walls, requiring solid shot to peel away layers of bricks until the walls collapsed, an absurdly inefficient process. The mortar, with its short, thick barrel, was different. It had a wide firing angle, low muzzle velocity, and a high arc trajectory. It was designed to utilize the free fall motion of the projectile to attack targets hiding behind obstacles, and could also be used to bombard city walls from above. During firing preparation, the cannon was raised to a vertical angle. One person poured the calculated amount of gunpowder into the chamber, and then the cannonball was loaded. The mortar shells used by the Arda army weighed over 40 kilograms, requiring 2 to 3 people to load them. Supports were used to ensure the shell was centered in the barrel, and shovels and hammers were used for adjustment. Once the shell was in place, the mortar was precisely adjusted to a 45-degree angle. Then, the artillery platoon leader or deputy platoon leader was responsible for aiming. The angle adjustment and the loading of gunpowder directly affected the accuracy of the fire. Lifting was accomplished by levers on the handles facing the outer edge of the base. The final step was firing. After the mortars roared, lumps of iron rained down from the sky, smashing the castle buildings to pieces. Some unlucky people were even smashed into mincemeat. Often, one volley was enough to break the morale of the people inside the castle. After the Battle of Bideborough, the power of the fire crossbows and thunder hammers had greatly intimidated the lords of the northwest. Now, even hiding in the fortified castle, they could not withstand the onslaught and could only raise the white flag and surrender. Thus, the Arda army suffered no casualties. They marched along an S-shaped route, driving out the Kent family's local ruling power along the way and appointing those willing to serve Arda as administrators. Finally, they arrived not far from Byronburg, and by this time, a large part of Emden was under their control. Byronburg was the residence of the Kent family members, but neither the Kent father nor his son were there at the time. Malps Kent, who had inherited the dukedom, and his son were staying in Sent. News of the Arda army's southward march was also on his desk. Chapter 258. Chapter 255. A hush fell over the hall. Everyone bowed their heads, remaining silent. Everyone knew the Earl, now the Duke, was seething with rage, but no one dared to confront him directly. The bad news was that the Gleman family's army had suddenly marched south, invading Emden, the former territory of the Kent family, and driving away Kent officials and vassal lords along the way. The good news? Well, not exactly good news, but better than the previous one. The Arda had stopped not far from Byronburg. Paul Gleman, he was utterly insane. Didn't he know what he was dealing with? The Kent family had always been the second most powerful family in the Northwest Bay, and now, having acquired the dukeship, they were even more powerful than ever. It was only because it wasn't convenient to wage war that they hadn't had time to deal with them. And to cause trouble while everyone was busy with spring planting, this was utterly despicable and shameless. According to the information, there are over 1,000 Arda people. It's not a large number, but it's not small either, especially for Arda, a country with a sparse population. It's a real waste that so many able-bodied men aren't working in the fields. They can certainly rob grain. This is truly, such banditry. Maltz Kent looked around the hall and asked, "Do you have any good ideas on how to drive the Arda people out?" The crowd was slightly surprised. The Duke's tone sounded very calm. Could he really remain so composed after his homeland had been attacked? However, since the Duke had asked, those below began to offer their suggestions. "Your Grace, we only suffered a minor defeat before, yet Gleman has become so arrogant. Please regroup your forces and fight them to the death. Why not retake Bittelberg first and avenge this humiliation? The Arda's firearms are formidable. We must find a way to counter them, you cowards. No matter how powerful you are, how powerful can you be? Do you think they can stop us if we charge with our cavalry?" The hall was filled with a cacophony of noise. Maltz felt a bitter taste in his mouth. The Emden lords, driven to scent by the Arda army, complained to him, their words filled with terror at the enemy's fire crossbows and thunderhammers. After the smoke rose, men and horses fell to the ground, even armor was useless. The sound was like thunder, a single shot could travel dozens of miles. Although some of their words were clearly exaggerations, the power of the Arda's weapon seemed undeniable. "Damn it, this is clearly magic and sorcery, those biased, damned church." The noise in the hall greatly annoyed the Duke. He glanced at his intelligence chief, who sat silently, and waved him over, leading him to the study. "Your Grace, why did you summon me? How's the intelligence gathering on Arda going?" "Up a little. Actually, I was planning to discuss this with you after the meeting, but since you've summoned me, I'll present it to you first." The intelligence chief pulled a roll of parchment from his robes and respectfully handed it to the Duke with both hands. Since the outbreak of war, the Duke's palace had ordered a complete halt to all trade with the anti-Kent Alliance territories, including Arda. Thus, the territories siding with Maltz Kent could no longer enjoy cheap paper, and everyone had to resort to expensive parchment. At least, that's how Maltz Kent saw it. All his correspondence and official reports were on parchment. Maltz glanced at it a few times, then waved to his chief. "I need to analyze this carefully. You can wait outside." "Yes, sir." The supervisor respectfully took his leave, though he was a little puzzled. The Duke's hands seemed trembling. After the supervisor left, Maltz rested his arm on the table, his right hand against his forehead, frowning for a long time with his eyes closed, before unfolding the parchment scroll again. Too careless. Too negligent. He should have crushed the Gleman brat last year. Below is the content of the parchment. "Your Excellency Duke, after extensive investigation, we have gained a general understanding of the Gleman family's military strength, summarized as follows. Since the pirate raids last year, Arda has maintained a standing army, and its size has grown significantly over the past year, now estimated at around 2,000 to 3,000 men. This means that Arda deployed less than half of its army in the Battle of Bittelberg. This force of over 2,000 men includes a naval unit of at least 600, likely established during last year's anti-piracy campaign. As for why it was retained after the pirates were eliminated, our reconnaissance in Franklin suggests that Gleman intends to develop long-distance trade and has already taken action. Alda has invented a new type of ship well-suited for ocean voyages. Rumors circulate in Franklin that these ships have already reached the Cape Bay area. Regarding the Army's equipment, although armor coverage is low, they possess deadly fire crossbows and thunderhammers. When Gleman marched on Barden to quell the rebellion, they were a mixed force of fire crossbowmen and spearmen. By the time of the Battle of Bittelberg this year, they were exclusively equipped with fire crossbows, which had been further improved by attaching bayonets, enabling soldiers to engage in both ranged and close combat. As for the fire crossbows and thunderhammers, intelligence indicates they were most likely invented by Paul Gleman himself. Regarding the army's quality, according to scouts, the soldiers' shots can be heard daily near the camp, from morning till night without interruption, except perhaps on the weekend when there seems to be no activity. Although we haven't found out what they're training for, their 6-day-a-week drill rate far exceeds that of ordinary armies. Even the knights rarely dedicate 6 days a week to martial arts practice. Furthermore, the high-intensity training means a high-quality diet, otherwise, the soldiers' bodies wouldn't be able to withstand it. With advanced and sophisticated weaponry and ample supplies, this army's expenditure is undoubtedly enormous. A year ago, Arda was a barren earldom, but its current performance has overturned our previous impressions. We analyze the reasons for this change as follows. First, Gleman united with a neighboring Baradin. Although Arda is poor, Baradin is considered relatively better among the northwestern territories, and this move alone will increase tax revenue several times over. Secondly, there were the inventions of various new things, such as porcelain, paper, and canned goods, things people had never seen before, which greatly facilitated their lives. Before the technology to manufacture them spread, Gleman would continue to reap huge profits from them. In addition, Arda had a method for mass-producing salt, significantly reducing its cost. Now, almost all salt merchants in the Northwest base sourced their salt from Arda. Porcelain, paper, canned goods, and salt. In the words of Arda merchants, these were their flagship products for foreign trade. Furthermore, Gleman was also selling an expensive agricultural machine to the landowners within his territory. The machine's effectiveness in promoting agriculture was yet to be determined, but it had already earned him a large amount of gold coins. Thirdly, there was the rise of industry and commerce in Arda and Baradin. After the emergence of these flagship products, Gleman adopted a policy of supporting industry and commerce in both regions, attracting a large number of private workshop owners and merchants to participate in the production and sale of these products. Although the tax rate decreased after the policy was implemented, the increased scale of production still resulted in a significant increase in tax revenue. A nightmarish week. Chapter 259 Countermeasures. The Duke of Kent held the report in his hand, feeling an urge to tear it to shreds. Who had allowed Gleman to make so much money? He looked up at the porcelain vase on the table, grabbed it, and was about to smash it to the ground. But the Duke's hand hovered in midair, unable to drop it, and finally, with an awkward expression, he placed the vase back in its place. Maltz then summoned the Chief of Intelligence, ordering him to go to the hall and summon several of his trusted men, dismissing the others. A while later, the trusted men arrived, including Emerson Wilder. The Duke's son was absent. He had been busy with many matters requiring his personal attention, such as reorganizing the army and recruiting new soldiers. The Duke explained the current predicament to his trusted men. We must find a weapon that can counter the fire crossbows and thunderhammers, and then we can overwhelm them with our numbers. But how easy was that? The existing bows and crossbows were inferior to the former two in both range and power. The men racked their brains but could not come up with a good solution. Uncle Kent, I have an idea, but I don't know if it's feasible. Emerson suddenly spoke up, and Maltz immediately said as if he had seen a light in the darkness, "Oh? Tell me about it. Have you heard of a longbow?" "A longbow? We have those here too. The longbow I'm talking about isn't an ordinary longbow, but the kind that's longer and bigger." Emerson gestured with his hands, introducing it to everyone in the study. This longbow is about 1.5 to 2 meters long, made of yew wood. Elm oak can also be used, but yew wood is best because it is strong, not easily broken, tough, and flexible, allowing it to be drawn longer. Its range can reach about 200 to 300 meters, which is comparable to the Arda's fire crossbows. Moreover, its power is great. It can penetrate leather, padded armor, and fabric at a distance of about 220 to 260 meters, or even chainmail. Plate armor or scale armor can withstand its penetration, but if hit head-on within 100 meters, even plate armor cannot withstand it. At a range of 50 meters, the longbow arrows are practically indestructible. Emerson's description made everyone's eyes light up. This weapon was terrifying. Really? Emerson, is the longbow you're talking about really that powerful? Emerson hesitated for a moment. Oh, I just heard it from someone else. There might be some exaggeration involved, but the longbow's immense power is undeniable. Maltz Kent made the final decision. You have to try it no matter what. Do you have a way to make this kind of bow? Or you can buy it. I don't know how to make it, but I know where to buy it. However, Uncle Kent, just buying it isn't enough. Training soldiers to operate longbows is not easy. It requires years of long-term training to become a qualified longbowman. Is there any solution to this? Mercenaries. Mercenaries. Yes, Uncle Kent. Hire longbowmen, preferably from large mercenary groups. Maltz Kent narrowed his eyes. He knew of mercenaries, in war-torn regions. Large numbers of these people, willing to risk their lives for money, operated. They either worked alone or formed groups, and some mercenary groups grew to astonishing sizes, their fighting power even rivaling that of a powerful lord's army. However, most mercenaries were extremely morally corrupt, devoid of any sense of honor, and frequently acted as bandits and robbers. While local soldiers recruited within the territory also robbed, they still showed some consideration for their fellow countrymen. Mercenaries, being complete outsiders, had no such constraints. Of course, this latter characteristic was not within Maltz Kent's considerations. The only thing that worried him was the price of the mercenary fee. The price for someone willing to risk their life was certainly not low. But if he could defeat the alliance of lords opposing him, annex their territories and wealth, especially that of Paul Gleman, he would ultimately recoup his losses many times over. The Duke slammed his hand on the table and exclaimed, "Excellent, young Emerson. This is exactly what I need, weapons and soldiers, all at once." Emerson puffed out his chest. "If Uncle Kent is interested, I'm willing to make a trip to contact the various mercenary groups." Maltz agreed. "Good, this matter is entrusted to you. The price is negotiable, the main thing is to be able to gather a sufficient number of troops." Emerson reminded him, "However, this will take time. Before the mercenaries arrive, we need to find a way to hinder Gleman. Although his army has stopped advancing, there's no guarantee they won't resume their offensive." The Duke said somberly, "Yes, this is indeed an urgent problem." The intelligence chief, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke up. "Your Grace, please leave this matter to us. What good ideas do you have?" The intelligence chief smiled slightly. "Count Gleman has made his territory quite impressive this past year, but he doesn't realize that 2 volcanoes are buried beneath his feet. Although they are still relatively small, they will erupt sooner or later." The Duke instructed him to continue. "The report mentioned that Arda has developed a new method for salt production, capable of rapidly and massively producing salt. On the surface, this seems like the best thing ever, but what? There are a large number of salt farmers along the coast who rely on boiling salt for their livelihood. They use the traditional method, but they can't compete on cost with a new method. Salt merchants won't buy from them, leaving the salt farmers almost destitute. If we..." Before the intelligence chief could finish, someone in the room shouted, "I know what you're going to say. This is a terrible idea. Your Grace, you absolutely cannot use this method." The one who interrupted was a vassal of the Kent family. He said righteously, "Although we are at war with Gleman, we are still nobles. How can we incite commoners to oppose our own lord?" Other noble confidants chimed in. "Yes, it's utterly absurd, outrageous." The intelligence chief fell silent. Lacking a title, he couldn't comprehend what the gentlemen were thinking, especially since they were practically in a bind. The Duke of Kent waved his hand impatiently. "All right, we'll discuss this later. Do you have any other ideas?" Several suggestions came up, but none seemed feasible to Maltz. "Emerson, contact the mercenary group skilled with longbows. We'll retrain an army and try to hold off the Ardis until they arrive," the Duke announced finally. Everyone dispersed, except for the intelligence chief. "You said before that there were 2 volcanoes under Gleman's backside. What's the other one?" The intelligence chief's eyes lit up, and he whispered, "The countryside." "What's he up to in the countryside this time, after defeating the pirates?" Count Gleman implemented a decree, land consolidation, which consolidates the scattered farmland of various landowners and independent farmers through land swaps, aiming to make better use of the land. That decree sounds good. Yes, the decree is good. But in the countryside, many people underreport their farmland area to evade taxes, and many others have encroached on large amounts of public land due to lax management. As you know, this phenomenon is always difficult to eradicate. Maltz gave a wry smile, signaling the chief to continue. "In the process of replacing and consolidating arable land, the first thing to do is to investigate each family's land holdings and measure the actual area of arable land. Also, the quality of arable land varies, and no matter how hard we try to maintain fairness during the replacement process, some people will feel they are being taken advantage of. Therefore, we can make a big deal out of this." After the intelligence chief finished speaking, Maltz Kent pondered for a long time without saying a word, and finally simply said, "You may leave now." After the chief left, the Duke's study fell silent. Chapter 260. News of Arden's solo campaign against Empson spread throughout the Northwest Bay. causing the lords to once again take notice of this earldom that had distinguished itself at the Battle of Batauberg. Emson was Malpskent's stronghold. This was tantamount to daring to challenge a tiger single-handedly. Other lords in the alliance wrote to Paul with trepidation, urging him to proceed with caution, as they might not be able to provide timely support if the battle went poorly. Paul replied, assuring them of everything. Paul's confidence stemmed from two things: the current fighting strength of Arden's army and the new conscription system implemented by the General Staff. Since last year, the General Staff had been stationing personnel in various large villages and towns within the territory. These personnel were either retired officers and soldiers or active-duty soldiers directly transferred from the army. Their task was to organize and train the local militia, making them a qualified reserve force. At the start of the new year, these instructors were assigned to a new organization, the conscription station. Besides continuing to organize and train the local militia, the conscription station had a new task: to regularly compile a list of eligible conscripts within its jurisdiction. The criteria included age, height, physical fitness, and even neighborhood reputation and family criminal records. This information was then compiled and sent to Lakeside Town. When all his various armed groups, the Navy, Army, and internal security forces, were short of personnel, for example, due to heavy casualties or the need to form new units, the General Staff would provide the latest conscript list, select a batch from various locations according to a set ratio, and send conscription notices to the local conscription stations. The conscription station personnel would then visit each household with these notices, and finally, on the designated date, gather the conscripts and send them to Lakeside Town for registration. This is how a new batch of Aldous soldiers was born. After 3 months of intensive training, they would be ready to take up arms and go to the battlefield. In an emergency, they would hastily train for a few days and then send them straight to the battlefield, since most of their enemies had only recently laid down their hoes. According to the General Staff's calculations, under ideal circumstances, without considering other factors, the new militia and conscription systems would allow Arda and Barden to mobilize a total of 15,000 men in an emergency. The Gleman family, as earls, had few vassals and had always been considered a symbol of weakness, but this was a significant advantage for Paul. Every inch of his territory was under his direct control, and his decrees could reach every town and village, at least in theory. Other lords of his rank did not have this advantage. Their decrees were only effective within their own territories. In the territories of their vassals, they had to obtain the vassal's approval before being implemented. Of course, this also depended on the relationship between the lord and vassal. If the lord held absolute power, most of his decrees could be enforced in the vassal territories, but the effectiveness of that enforcement was another matter entirely. Furthermore, a vassal's obligations to their lord are not unlimited. For example, if a baron has 20 knights and can raise 500 soldiers, strictly speaking, he only needs to provide a superior feudal lord with 5 knights and a little over 100 soldiers to fulfill his vassal duty. Lords only commit their full strength when defending their own territories. However, in reality, no one would be foolish enough to provide only the minimum troops required by vassal obligations to their lord. Besides demonstrating loyalty, providing more troops also gives them greater say in the distribution of spoils after war. But superior feudal lords cannot abuse the loyalty of their vassals. After a vassal's troops have been conscripted for a certain period, they must either be dismissed and sent home, or their expenses must be covered, and even additional military pay must be paid. Before the deadline stipulated by their obligations, vassal armies were responsible for their own logistics and equipment. This obligation extended down the ranks, and in most places, the lowest-ranking soldiers, after being conscripted by their lords, had to pay for their own weapons and armor. Of course, if you felt incredibly lucky or didn't care about your life, you could simply grab a hoe and go to the battlefield, regardless of your equipment. You just had to be there. This resulted in local lords' armies often having a chaotic mix of uniforms and equipment. In Paul Gleman's view, even the Battle of Batauberg, with its tens of thousands of soldiers, resembled an enlarged version of a village brawl. A few wealthy lords would maintain a group of full-time or part-time soldiers, dressed in uniform and carrying standardized weapons, but their numbers were not large. For example, the archers who appeared in the Battle of Batauberg were former soldiers of Duke Ferdinand, who were gathered for archery training 2 afternoons a week. Only powerful nations, such as the Gabella Empire's royal family, the Aldo royal family, or semi-independent dukes like Giles with vast territories and numerous vassals, could afford to maintain a well-organized army. In the previous campaign, the Arda army had occupied almost half of Emson's territory. Under the Kent family's management over generations, Emson had developed into a large earldom, with a population of nearly 100,000 in half of its territory. If the 1st and 3rd battalions continued their advance, although the common people of this era were not particularly loyal to their lords, Paul still feared unrest in the newly conquered lands. Therefore, the southward advance halted at Byronburg. One of the objectives of the operation was to create a buffer zone between Arda Baildon and Emson, and this objective had now been achieved. Moreover, Byronburg, the Kent family's residence, was more fortified and better defended than Bitterburg. Even with artillery, conquering it would be no easy task. Paul planned to wait for the armies of other allies to regroup before fighting the Kent family together. Fighting on the front lines, building on the rear. The rebellion in the south forced the royal family to procure armor and weapons throughout the country. Arda's iron production had surged due to the adoption of new technologies, while the cost of iron smelting had decreased significantly. Naturally, Arda wanted a share of the royal family's booming demand for weapons. However, the royal family needed finished weapons. Arda's blacksmiths were barely enough for their own production within the territory. How could they possibly spare any for producing swords and armor, things Paul considered destined for obsolescence? Moreover, both Arda and Barden had very few blacksmiths skilled in crafting traditional weapons. But other territories had them. It was time to discuss cooperation with their allies. Chapter 261 Vernier Calipers and Northwestern Industrial University. While Arda and Byron might lack a sufficient number of blacksmiths, other territories certainly did. For instance, the blacksmiths of Earl Price Parker's territory were renowned throughout the Northwest Bay for their expertise in crafting weapons and armor. Besides numerous blacksmiths in the countryside, the Earl himself ran a large weapons workshop. This was the source of the old Earl's confidence in organizing an alliance against the Kent family. Therefore, Paul invited his allies to Laketown and proposed a plan to jointly manufacture and sell weapons. He would provide the raw materials, the blacksmiths in each territory would process them into weapons, and then the profits would be shared. Arda and Byron can produce a large quantity of iron, both pig iron and wrought iron. As much as you need, we can provide, Paul said, leaving the lords speechless. This young man's boasting was too much. Can you give a rough figure? For example, how many tons of pig iron can you produce in a year? Earl Parker asked on behalf of the lords. What figure should they give? Would revealing the real figures be considered boasting? While Paul could consider it, Hansel held up 4 fingers. By the end of this year, our 2 locations will be able to reach an annual output of 400 tons. He winked at Paul, telling him to exaggerate regardless of whether it was achievable, since they wouldn't need that much anyway. Damn, that's really boasting, Paul thought. Increasing production isn't just about building more blast furnaces and reverberator ray furnaces, it also involves increasing iron and coal production, coke refining, and most importantly, training workers in these industries. Never mind that, Paul slammed his hand on the table, echoing Hansel's words, that's right. If you need more, we can increase production even further. Sure enough, their boasting stunned everyone, and the lords exchanged bewildered glances. Grayman must have been blessed by God or made a deal with the devil. If they hadn't witnessed the wonders of firearms and cannons during their previous joint operations, they would have been absolutely certain. Ahem. If what you say is true, Your Excellency, then that is a great boon. Not only can we sell it to other regions, but we can also use it to arm our own troops, which will be much more advantageous when fighting against Malskent's army. Absolutely right, Viscount. To be honest, I'm planning to equip every one of my soldiers with a breastplate. Paul smiled at Viscount Johnston, who shrank his shoulders guiltily. A year ago, he had sent spies to infiltrate Arda to steal paper-making technology. He wondered if Gleman would hold a grudge. Who could have imagined that Arda would develop into a monster with 2,000 standing elite troops and an annual iron production of 400 tons? Fortunately, he was now on the same side as Earl Gleman. Earl Malkin asked, but once the weapons are forged, how will we transport them in large quantities to the south? This isn't just ordinary cargo, Paul answered, it's simple, by sea. Not only will the cargo volume be enormous, but we can also avoid the tariffs in the various territories along the way south. The price won't include taxes, increasing the competitiveness of our products by another 10%. Sea transport? Indeed, it was an innovative method. The lords had already heard that the shipyards in Arda were building a new type of ship. Not only entirely wind-powered but also with an enormous cargo capacity. I heard you wiped out the pirates in the Northwest Bay. Was that to pave the way for large-scale sea transport? Earl Parker stroked his beard and asked. Yes, I already had that idea back then, and you've already sent an expedition to Horn Bay. That's right, Horn Bay will be my key trading partner from now on. Sigh. Speaking of wiping out pirates, we coastal lords all owe you a thank you. Earl Parker's words reminded everyone of the pirate uprising last year, when Gleman had sought help from those around him but was met with evasive responses, and they couldn't help but feel a flush of embarrassment. Haha. It's nothing, not worth mentioning. Although he had some complaints in his heart, Paul was still very happy that his achievements were recognized by everyone. With solutions for raw materials and transportation capacity in place, everyone was willing to join the joint manufacturing and sales plan for weapons. After all, nobody turns down money. Paul further suggested, gentlemen, in order to improve production efficiency, I recommend that you use your authority as lords to gather the blacksmiths who forge weapons together, merge small workshops into large ones, and encourage blacksmiths to exchange techniques and improve their skills together. Furthermore, since it's joint production, I strongly suggest that our various territories standardize the production of weapons and uniformly prefix them with Northwest or Gulf to create a brand effect. Rest assured, this world is not peaceful. There are so many wars. We can't just focus on the rebellions in the south. If we unite, there will definitely be no situation where some get the spoils while others only get the scraps. Derek Heller echoed, that's right. I've heard that the Gabella Empire is preparing for war with its eastern neighbor. A war of this magnitude requires a massive amount of weaponry. Price Parker nodded, saying, standardization is indeed better. I agree. Under his influence, the other lords also agreed. Gentlemen, Paul said, the standardization I'm referring to isn't just about making weapons and armor identical in shape, but about ensuring even the dimensions are exactly the same, with an error margin of millimeters. Paul, that's asking too much? No, Paul replied, I believe quality is the primary factor in establishing our reputation. Remember this word, standardization, standardization, Paul exclaimed. Yes, standardization. I've specifically created something to achieve this. Bring me a ruler. Several servants entered from outside the hall, placing a strange object on each lord's table. The lords examined it closely. As Paul had said, it was a ruler with graduations, but its construction was quite complex. I call this a vernier caliper. It can accurately measure the dimensions of things. The specific instructions are included. With it, we can strive towards standardization. At this time, the vernier caliper's accuracy couldn't compare to its counterparts on Earth, but it was sufficient for basic production. The lords marveled at the vernier caliper, while some secretly cursed Paul as a freak. After a full day of discussion, the lords decided to establish what Paul called a company, named Northwest Industries, specializing in the production and sale of weapons and equipment. Shares were allocated, with Paul as the initiator and having virtually monopolized raw materials and freight, holding the largest share. Next were Price Parker and Myron Garnard, followed by the other lords. This wasn't fixed. Shareholder meetings would be held regularly to adjust shares based on individual contributions. Finally, a general bylaw was drafted, and Earl Myron Garnard of Byron was elected to manage the day-to-day affairs of Northwest Industries, as his territory was now under the administration of the Lakeside Town government, leaving him with the least free time. Quality. Quality. And more quality. I will not ship any substandard products, Paul emphasized finally. Chapter 262 Provocation. Kevin pushed his wheelbarrow along the road with a joyful heart, followed by several people from his village, some pushing carts like Karen, others carrying loads on shoulder poles. This group had come to Franklin Port to deliver goods. The wealthy merchant, Mr. Adela, ran a purchasing station there, specializing in buying salt produced using traditional methods. Unlike other salt merchants who were arrogant and disdainful of them because of their wealth, this Mr. Adela was kinda unapproachable, getting along well with the salt farmers and constantly addressing them as my friend, making Kevin and the others feel that he genuinely considered them friends. Strangely, they had never seen Mr. Adela selling salt in the vicinity. He said it was being transported to the Far East. However, they didn't care where he sold it, as long as they could earn enough money to support their families. The group arrived at the purchasing station's entrance, where they saw people going in and out, seemingly carrying goods. Mr. Adela, with his round belly and prosperous appearance, stood at the entrance directing his servants. Kevin stepped forward to greet him. "Master Adela, what brings you here?" The merchant Adela turned around, saw Kevin, and quickly replied, "Oh, it's Kevin. You've delivered goods." "Yes, we've brought all the salt from the village." A hint of guilt appeared on Adela's face. He glanced at the group behind Kevin, then gently pulled Kevin aside. He whispered, "To be honest, Kevin, I was just about to send someone to find you. Is it something important? Your business?" I can't continue. I have to move in the next few days." Upon first hearing this, Kevin didn't react. After a while, he hurriedly said, "What do you mean? Master Adela, what do you mean by not being able to do business with us?" Adela said with difficulty, "Alice, isn't it all because of this recent war? All the trade routes to the east are cut off. I have no connections in other directions." "War? This damned war." Kevin clenched his fists tightly, wanting to punch but finding no target. Adela's face was full of sympathy. "Ah, you've come all this way, it must be hard for you. Come and rest in my shop. Considering how long we've cooperated, let me treat you to a meal. Please invite your companions in." "Thank you, Lord Adela," Kevin said weakly, his stomach truly rumbling. He returned to his companions and told them that Adela was leaving Franklinport. The crowd erupted in chaos. "What? Lord Adela is leaving already? What are we going to do? My family urgently needs money." Sigh, "Let's fill our stomachs first and then think of something." At the table, no one spoke. They just ate in silence, the atmosphere unusually somber. Adela smiled bitterly and said to them, "No hurdle is insurmountable. I will return after this war ends and the trade routes resume. Then I will still need your supplies." Kevin and the others could only smile bitterly. Heaven knows when this damned war will end. The lords don't care about the suffering of ordinary people like them. "Someone, bring that barrel of liquor from the kitchen. Let's have a few drinks today. I've considered you all friends all this time, and it's a little hard to leave like this." Adela waved her hand, ordering the waiter to fetch the liquor. Kevin stood up to stop her. "Master Adela, how can we accept this? You've already done us a great favor by treating us to a meal." Adela stared at him. "Are you not giving me face? Sit down." Kevin had no choice but to sit down. The barrel of liquor was quickly brought to the table, and everyone had a large glass in front of them. Adela raised her glass first and said loudly, "Cheers." Kevin stared at the liquor in front of him, his feelings very complicated. Sigh, "They say that getting drunk can make you forget your troubles. Drink up." He raised his glass to his lips, and his companions, seeing his action, also picked up their glasses. "Damn. This liquor is too strong." Kevin drank it all in one gulp. The spicy taste made him frown tightly, and he almost choked. He had never drunk such strong liquor before. However, after swallowing it, an unprecedented burning sensation rose from her lower abdomen, quickly spreading throughout her body, creating a strange feeling in her brain. Her companions also displayed a range of expressions, some even stuck out their tongues and exhaled sharply from the spiciness. Adela smiled slightly. "None of you have ever drunk anything like this before. Come on, another one." After several drinks, everyone was somewhat tipsy. Adela draped her arm over Kevin's shoulder, her face flushed and reeking of alcohol. "Young Kevin. Actually, my leaving wasn't entirely due to the war. I also," sigh, "never mind, let's drink." The other seemed to have something difficult to say. Kevin tried to stay sober and asked, "Master Adela, what other reason is there? You don't need to hide anything from us." Adela sighed deeply. "Alice, those saltworks owners in Port Franklin, and the officials here, they can't tolerate me." "Can't tolerate you? Why?" Adela said, her eyes glazed with drunkenness. "I have a huge demand in their territory, but I've never bought from them, which has seriously offended them. Actually, I didn't do it on purpose. It's just that my target customers only prefer salt boiled using traditional methods." Kevin slammed his fist on the table angrily. "Don't they intend to give us a way to survive? We've made our living by boiling salt for generations. If we drive you away, who will we sell our salt to?" A fleeting glimmer of light flashed in Adela's eyes. She sighed deeply. "These days, everyone's obsessed with money. You're just competitors in their eyes. They'd love for you to starve. Let me tell you, there's a rumor circulating that the boiled salt is poisonous, silently eroding health. They're probably the ones spreading it. That's outrageous. Before the saltworks existed, they ate our salt for generations, and for hundreds of years, No one ever died from it, one of Kevin's companions shouted angrily. Adela shook her head, looking helpless. Rumors are the worst. If so many people say it, you can't help but believe it, sigh. There's nowhere to sell the salt, and taxes are due again in a couple of days. Those fat salt works owners are truly hateful. Under the influence of alcohol, everyone became more talkative, complaining about the injustice of the world. Only Kevin silently drank his wine, swallowing one glass after another. Chapter 263 Taxes. 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 After eating at the merchant Adela's shop, Kevin went around the town square trying to sell the salt he had brought. At first, no one bought any, so they had to lower the price again and again. By sunset, they had finally earned some money, but it was definitely a loss. Even so, they still had things they couldn't avoid. Your Honor, we've only earned this much this afternoon. Please have mercy and waive our taxes, Kevin and the others pleaded humbly with a tax official who came to collect his money. The tax collector shook his head and said firmly, I don't care how much you earn. As long as you do business in this town, you have to pay taxes to the Lord. Don't think you can escape my eyes, sir, one of them said. We are salt farmers who make a living by boiling salt. Because of the rise of the saltworks, we have had to lower the price of our own salt repeatedly to sell it. We're already losing money by only making this little bit. If you take some as tax, we've come all this way for nothing. The tax collector remained unmoved and said, I have no say in any of this. As the tax collector of fuel and port, I cannot break the rules because of the special circumstances of one or two people. Rules are rules. Without rules, how can Lord Gleman rule his territory? Kevin and the others persisted, pleading in every way possible. Finally, the tax collector became annoyed and beckoned several tax collectors from the town hall to surround them. I don't have time to waste with you. Two choices, either pay your taxes obediently, or you'll have to do forced labor instead. Choose for yourselves. Seeing that the other party had given them an ultimatum, the villagers had no choice but to comply. After paying their taxes, each person could clearly feel that their money bags were lighter. The tax collector snorted and led the tax collectors away. What a bunch of paupers. If it weren't for Lord Griles driving away the pirates, would you still be able to do business peacefully in town? Kevin and the others clenched their fists angrily, but dared not utter a sound. The group discussed it briefly and then headed towards the new church in Fland Harbor, except for Kevin, who seemed a little awkward. Upon reaching the entrance, Kevin said defiantly, I'll wait for you outside, hurry up. His companions shook their heads and entered the church. Almighty Lord, please bless us and show us the way, the villagers prayed devoutly to the statue of the god. After finishing their prayers, they handed a bag of salt they carried to the priest standing beside them. This is our village's offering to the Lord of Light this month. Please collect it on our behalf, Your Excellency. The offering they referred to was actually the so-called tithing, a tenth of the produce or income that believers were required to give to the church. Giving away such a large bag of salt was quite painful. After all, it was painstakingly boiled. But what if they didn't pay? What if they were punished by God? The priests said it was better to be safe than sorry. Moreover, the church's collection of tithes was recognized by the Lord's mansion and was mandatory. If the church discovered they hadn't paid, the tax collector would still come to collect it. Stubbornly refusing to pay would definitely lead to serious consequences if it reached the Lord. The priest tested the weight of the salt bag, a satisfied smile appearing on his face, and said in a gentle tone, The Lord of Light will surely bless the lambs who believe in him. The crowd bowed and withdrew. Seeing his companions emerge from the church, Kevin, who had been waiting impatiently outside, scoffed, I'm afraid the Lord of Light hasn't enjoyed a single drop of our offerings. They've all gone into the pockets of his loyal servants. Most of his companions looked helpless. They knew the church wasn't exactly clean. Only one usually very devout man suddenly changed his expression. Kevin, if you keep talking nonsense, I won't come selling salt with you next time. His warning had no effect, and Kevin continued to mock. You've been offering your offerings so diligently, yet the Lord of Light hasn't blessed you. You're still a penniless pauper like me. You, the devout believer couldn't win the argument and became agitated, ready to fight. All right, what kind of talk is it to fight over a little oral sex? Don't let the townspeople laugh at us. The other companions quickly separated them, but the two continued to hurl insults at each other. The pious man exclaimed, The servants of the gods toil day and night for us in serving the Lord of Light. It's only right that they receive a little reward. Kevin retorted, Their reward is far more than just a little. Their lives are comparable to those of nobles, completely contradicting what's stipulated in the Holy Scripture. The group listlessly embarked on their journey back to the village, chatting idly as they walked. It seems like we can't make a living just by boiling salt. We need to think of another way to earn a living. How about we go check out the salt works in feudal port? Maybe our family's traditional skills can come in handy there. What? You're really going to compromise and become a trader? Actually, I had that thought too. You're dreaming. If it were a few months earlier, there might have been a chance, but they're not hiring anymore. How do you know? Don't look at me like that. Okay, I admit I secretly asked. But they said that in a few months, the salt works will expand production and hire a lot of people. I heard they're going to sell salt south by sea. A few months? I think even a week is too long. We're almost starving. It's not like there aren't other options. Although the salt works aren't hiring right now, there are many other factories hiring: porcelain making, paper making, canning. There are more and more factories like that. Sigh, I've never handled any of this before. If I go there, I'll definitely have to start as an apprentice. It's so frustrating to abandon the family tradition. The group returned to the village, where many people were eagerly awaiting their return. When they learned that the merchant Adela was leaving Franklin Port and the salt they were transporting would have to be sold at a loss, the entire village was plunged into sorrow. Kevin returned home, hastily ate a few mouthfuls of food, and fell into deep sleep. He had set off for Franklin Port early that morning to sell salt and didn't return until after dark. He was utterly exhausted. A commotion woke Kevin. He opened his eyes and found it was already early morning. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, Kevin asked his parents, "What's going on outside so early in the morning?" His father didn't say a word, just sat at the table with a sullen expression, puffing on his pipe, which wasn't actually filled with tobacco, since the family's income had plummeted. His father had been using some plant leaves he'd found somewhere as a substitute. His mother, who was preparing breakfast, sighed, "What else can I do?" "Just listen." A voice that he found utterly repulsive reached Kevin's ears. "Folks, it's time to pay this month's poll tax, that damn tax again." No matter where he was, no matter when, he couldn't escape it. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264: War Tax. Kevin, clutching his tax bill, reluctantly left home and soon arrived at the tax collection point in the village center. A large crowd had already gathered there, and on a makeshift platform, a man was shouting something. "Folks, this time, besides the usual poll tax, we have to pay another tax," the crowd erupted in uproar. "Why do we have to pay an extra tax? This is outrageous. We don't have much money left. This is driving us to despair." The villagers were furious, expressing their discontent. "It's like this. It's like this. Let me explain," the tax collector shouted, finally silencing the villagers. "Aren't we at war with the usurper? When this war starts, gold coins flow out like water. The soldiers on the front lines need food and water, their weapons need sharpening, their armor needs repairing, all of this costs money, so the newly added tax is called the war tax. It will stop being collected once the war ends. But during the war, we still have to pay. Lord Bodden understands how hard life is for everyone, so he has compassionately reduced the war tax to 20 copper coins per person." 20 copper coins. "Are you trying to eat us?" Kevin shouted from the crowd. "We won't pay." "Yes, my family simply can't afford that much money." "We won't pay either." "No, no. We'll starve if we pay." Inspired by him, more and more people declared they wouldn't pay the tax. How can you do this?" This was personally ordered by Lord Bodden. Upon hearing Lord Bodden's name, the villagers' momentum immediately deflated. Lord Bodden was a well-known landowner in the area, and many people regarded him as the Lord's appointed tax collector, representing the Lord's authority. However, Kevin knew that Lord Bodden was merely a village tax farmer. Kevin ascended the platform. Lord Bodden's personal order is useless. Only the Lord can decide whether to add a new tax. I ask you, do you have a decree issued by the Lord's mansion as proof? A decree from the Lord's mansion. Several servants of the Bodden family were immediately dumbfounded, clearly not possessing such a document. Seeing them stumped, Kevin snorted and shouted to the villagers below, "Folks, If they cannot produce a decree from the Lord's mansion, then Baden is illegally imposing taxes, and we can report him to the Lord? Whoa, the crowd below stirred. Absurd. Nonsense. Utter nonsense. Several servants of the Baden family became agitated and immediately retorted. Lord Baden's words represent the Lord's will. He is the Lord's representative here. Kevin questioned, did the Lord agree to his increase in taxes? Since it was Lord Baden who said it, then the Lord must have agreed. We must see the decree. You can't read a single word. Even if we gave you the decree, you wouldn't understand it. Unfortunately, I do know some words. Please produce it. You mustn't resist paying taxes. Seeing that the servants of the Baden family were stammering and refusing to produce the decree Kevin mentioned, the villagers grew increasingly agitated. Vampire! Vampire! Get out of our village! Someone started it, and trash was thrown at the servants. You bunch of troublemakers, just you wait. The servants of the Baden family glared hatefully at Kevin, this troublemaker, and fled in panic amidst the villagers' trashy farewells, not even bothering to collect the poll tax. In a large mansion, the landowner Baden was chatting with several gentry friends. Their laughter punctuated by bursts of chatter. His steward rushed in, his face contorted with alarm, saying, Master, something terrible has happened. The burly Baden's face darkened. This panic is unacceptable. What's wrong? Has the sky fallen? There was a problem collecting taxes, Baden gestured, and the steward immediately fell silent. Gentlemen, please continue your conversation here. I'll be right back. You. Come with me. Baden rose, apologized to his guests, and led his servant to another room. Speak. What happened? The newly added war tax. The salt workers say they'll only pay it after seeing a decree issued by the Lord's mansion. Isn't that simple? Just find someone literate to forge one and fool them. Right, you can't do that, sir. There seems to be someone knowledgeable in that village. If they find out we forged the Lord's decree ourselves, then, the steward gestured fearfully towards his neck, making a beheading motion. HMPH. You were the one who suggested this, and now you're so scared. Oh, I didn't expect those illiterate salt workers to ask about this. What about the HUD tax? How much has been collected? Oh, the salt workers were quite agitated at the time, and they ran back in fear. Useless. Trash. Get those people out of here immediately. I never want to see them again. Baden was furious and vented his anger. Finally, he ordered, send another team to that village immediately, with plenty of clubs, and teach those who dare to evade taxes a good lesson. HMPH, I don't believe these lowly people won't obey. Yes, sir, the steward turned and left. Ever since the new lord ascended the throne and began his so-called agricultural reforms, Baden had been harboring a belly full of resentment. Besides the farmland registered in the Lord's manor, his family had also secretly encroached on a considerable amount of public land. Public land belonged directly to the Lord. Ordinary people could use it for firewood or occasional herding, but large-scale crop cultivation was strictly prohibited unless one purchased the operating rights from the Lord. This required registration within the Lord's manor, and once registered, taxes were levied on the Lord's manor based on area or output. In addition to taxes, 1/10 of the output had to be given to the church. However, if one secretly cultivates land on public land without the Lord's knowledge, then no taxes are paid, and the harvest is 100% theirs. This wasn't unique to Baden's family. Many gentry and landowners did this for generations, with successive lords turning a blind eye. Unexpectedly, last year, an agriculture minister named Hansel arrived, advocating for some kind of farmland consolidation. His first act was to investigate the amount of farmland in various regions. Hansel personally visited the areas, exposing vast tracts of encroached public land. After consulting with the current lord, he took action against this practice. For those who admitted to encroaching on farmland, a fine of 3 times the land's value was paid, and the land became theirs. They only needed to pay taxes. For those unable to pay 3 times the fine, a fine of 1 time was imposed, and the land was reclaimed. Some encroached farmland remained unclaimed, and it was simply reclaimed. In this process, the landowner Baden's family suffered heavy losses and was forced to pay large fines. Lord Baden, heartbroken, spent his days pondering how to make up for his losses. His steward gave him an idea, to use his status as a tax farmer to levy a war tax under the pretext of the recent war between the 2 factions of lords in the Northwest Bay. Chapter 265 Riot. On April 15, 1991, Sacred Calendar, a rider galloped into Franklin Harbor, heading straight for the city hall. Upon reaching the main gate, the rider tumbled to the ground, and the guards on duty helped him up. His chest heaved violently, clearly having ridden non-stop all the way. He gasped, "Rebellion! Rebellion! Those lowly people have rebelled. I want to see the mayor. I want to see the mayor." Hearing the word rebellion, the guards dared not be careless. After checking him thoroughly, they quickly helped him into the city hall. Half an hour later, the Franklin Harbor's guards and militia hastily assembled and rushed to the city gate, only to find it closed. Since the Lord's crackdown on pirates, this gate had never been closed during the day. Many believed something terrible must have happened. These are my initial ideas. At the naval base in Fland Harbor, Austin was discussing recent operational plans with the naval leaders. Not long ago, the staff of Lacquertown decided to launch a two-pronged attack. After the army occupied half of Emden's territory, they hoped the navy could also play a significant role in the war, a decision Austin readily agreed to. However, he was dissatisfied with the staff's conservative expectations, merely ordering the navy to sail upstream along the Weiss River and blockade the various inland river docks within Malpskent's sphere of influence in the east. This was a gross underestimation of them. In Austin's eyes, only by conquering territory like the Army's 1st and 3rd Battalions could the Navy truly demonstrate its capabilities. He decided to divide the Navy, with its 6 sailing warships, into 3 fleets, each with 2 ships. The commander of the 1st Fleet was Major Quake, the commander of the 2nd Fleet was Major Yarman, and the commander of the 3rd Fleet was Major Tirpitz. The plan was for the 1st Fleet to patrol the waters off Franklin Harbor, while the 2nd and 3rd Fleets would advance eastward along the river. Quake had stolen a show in exploring new sea routes. It was time for others to shine. Just as they were about to discuss the operational details further, a guard rushed into the conference room. "Lieutenant Colonel, Mayor Theodore requests your presence at the City Hall for an emergency meeting." "It's extremely urgent. Please come immediately," Austin asked doubtfully. "Extremely urgent?" "Yes, that's what the messenger said." "All right, I'll be right there." When Austin arrived at the conference room in the City Hall, many people had already gathered. Old Peter, the mayor's administrative advisor, the local conscription station chief, and other officials of various ranks. Clearly, the meeting had been going on for some time. "Lieutenant Colonel Austin, something terrible has happened." Upon seeing the naval commander enter, Mayor Theodore jumped to his feet. "Mayor, please calm down." "What happened?" Austin found a seat and asked slowly and methodically. "The salt farmers have rebelled." "What?" "Revolted." Austin, who had just sat down, stood up in shock. "Yes, Mr. Bodden just sent someone to inform us of this news." "Who is Mr. Bodden?" "A gentryman from Faber Village, and also a tax farmer in that area. I'd like to know the details first." Then, Mayor Theodore recounted the specifics of the salt farmers' rebellion. According to the information brought by Bodden's servant, it started during a tax collection 2 days ago. As a tax farmer, Lord Bodden sent people down to collect taxes as usual. However, those salt farmers, for some unknown reason, disregarded the sacred authority granted to Lord Bodden by the Lord and refused to pay taxes. Based on his duty and authority, Lord Bodden sent more people to urge them to pay, perhaps being somewhat impolite in his words. Unexpectedly, those unruly people attacked and injured people. Only a small portion of those who went to collect taxes escaped with bloodied heads. The fate of those who didn't return was unknown. Not only that, but the mob then collectively surrounded the village where Lord Bodden lived. Incited by them, many villagers and serfs from nearby villages joined the uprising, further increasing its strength. The mob stormed back into Lord Bodden's mansion, wantonly looting, burning, and killing indiscriminately. Many inside the mansion perished. Lord Bodden, left with no other option, fled through a secret tunnel in his house, temporarily hiding in a secluded farm. He sent a servant on horseback at breakneck speed to Franklin Harbor to report to the town hall. This was the gist of the story. Austin listened in silence. He didn't believe that the Lord Bodden was as innocent as the servant described. These so-called tax farmers, weren't they all blood-sucking bastards? What kind of tax farmer wouldn't use their power to shift their tax burden onto the common people? The naval commander asked. "So, Mayor, what do you need me to do?" Mayor Theodore replied, "I would like to request that the Navy dispatch sailors to help us maintain order." Austin frowned. "For such a potential combat mission, I must consult the General Staff. Moreover, according to the regulations set by His Excellency the Earl, the Navy and Army are responsible for external affairs." Shouldn't internal conflicts like this be handled by the internal security forces? Theodore shook his head. Fran Harbor only has one platoon of internal security forces, which is far too few. Even with a militia, there are only a few hundred men. According to the description given, the riders have likely taken over many villages, and their numbers probably exceed 2,000. I don't feel confident of victory. The Navy has muskets and cannons, only your intervention can quickly quell the unrest. Lieutenant Colonel, you don't need to worry about violating regulations. I have already sent someone to Lakeside Town to request instructions, and we should receive a response tomorrow. Until then, please ensure that your troops assist us in protecting Fran Harbor. I fear that if the rioters grow in size, they might attack this place. Once Lakeside Town agrees, you can then go out to suppress them. Austin nodded. No problem. After all, Flanders is a naval base, and protecting it is our inescapable responsibility. I'll also send out scouts to find out their background. He stood up. The situation is urgent. If there's nothing else, I'll return to base now to arrange for troops to assist in the defense. All right, thank you for your help. After seeing Austin off, Theodore breathed a sigh of relief and slumped into his chair. It's been so long since something like this happened. Why did it have to happen during my term? These rioters are truly hateful. His advisor, old Peter, sitting beside him, said, Mayor, we can't jump to conclusions yet. The salt workers around here are usually law-abiding. Their actions are probably due to some unknown hardship, whatever their hardship. Robbery and murder are wrong. Besides, we're at war with the usurpers. Isn't this just hindering us? These fools have no sense of the bigger picture or right and wrong, Mayor Theodore said bitterly. Chapter 266 Dilemma. Paul was completely dumbfounded when he received news of the riot. A look of astonishment lingered on his face for a full half-minute. What did I do wrong? He asked himself after recovering. Earl, this is not the time for such questions. Please quickly summon the officials to discuss how to suppress the rebellion. Cecil, the intelligence chief who had come to report the news, urged anxiously. You're right. Quickly. Summon all the heads of the government council and all officers of company rank and above stationed in Lakeside Town to the Lord's Manor. Cecil obeyed and left, while Paul, dejected, went to the hall to await their arrival. Since awakening his memories of his past life, he had always considered it his duty to promote the progress of this world, inventing all sorts of novelties, establishing factories, and promoting education, all for the betterment of the people on this land. And judging from his own Lakeside Town, the residents' lives were indeed getting better and better. Why didn't this happen in the neighboring territories, but instead befell him, the enlightened and progressive lord? A rebellion. This is a rebellion. Hansel was agitated upon hearing the news and was the first to jump out and shout, please send troops immediately to suppress the rioters. Everyone else, including Chief Steward Ford, nodded in agreement, indicating that sending troops was the top priority. Chief of Staff Schroeder, Battalion Commander Claude of the 2nd Infantry Battalion, and Battalion Commander Andrew of the 4th Infantry Battalion stated that the army was ready to be dispatched at his command. Gentlemen, please calm down, Paul said, though inwardly he was panicking. All the information we have so far comes from that man named Bodden. Whether it's a real riot or not is still uncertain. Maybe they've just gathered together, and that Bodden guy got scared and is exaggerating. Chief Steward Ford shook his head. Even so, without the Lord's permission and supervision, large-scale gatherings are prohibited. Dispersing them is justified, and the leaders must be punished. Just as they were discussing this, a second message arrived, this time carried by the Army's carrier pigeons. Naval scouts have confirmed that the settlements in and around Fade Village are ablaze with flames and billowing smoke. It's definitely a large-scale riot, and many wealthy homes have been looted. Schroeder frowned as he read the note. The information from the Navy confirmed his earlier statement. Someone on the scene shouted, Schroeder murmured, they shouted the slogan down with the Lord, Your Excellency, time is of the essence. Please make a decision quickly. Mayor Theodore requests permission for the Navy to quell the rebellion. To be on the safe side, please send 2 more companies to support them. Paul hesitated. According to his deeply ingrained belief, uprisings by the common people possessed an inherent sense of justice. Indiscriminate suppression was far too brutal. Moreover, perhaps due to his scattered thoughts, he thought of Qin Shi, Yang Guang, and countless rulers overthrown by peasant uprisings. They all started as tiny sparks, which then escalated uncontrollably. Would he be branded with historical shame for rashly choosing suppression? I say, can't we send someone to talk to them first? To understand why they rioted? Maybe they have some compelling reasons. Talk? Upon hearing this, everyone stared at him in disbelief. Negotiate with the mob? Was this something a lord should say? Ahem. Hansel coughed lightly and asked, My lord, what would you do if they made a request for something out of necessity, such as tax reduction? Paul thought for a moment and replied, If the request isn't too unreasonable, I think I'll grant it. I've always strived to be a benevolent lord, Hansel said seriously. No. Absolutely not. Once the door is opened, there will be no turning back. Why? Isn't it normal for the lord to weigh the wishes of his subjects and decide whether to grant them? That's in normal times. If they haven't rioted and are simply expressing their wishes to you through ordinary channels, that's fine. Whether you grant them or not, the initiative is in your hands, and there will be no consequences. But now it's different. They've already rioted. In this context, if you grant their demands, what will others think of you? What will they think of me? As a lord, you are easily threatened and bullied. Regardless of your own thoughts, others will believe that the initiative lies with the mob. Your authority will then be unstable. The earl, who usually appears so awe-inspiring and unapproachable, will become obedient after a little commotion. It's not that serious, is it? Seeing Paul still stubborn, Steward Ford began to persuade him. Earl, Hansel is right. The people are a large group, within which exist many smaller groups, each with its own demands, some even conflicting. Their desires are endless, while what you can give them is ultimately limited. If you satisfy one group, another will emerge. As a lord, you can only give the people handouts, never allow them to take anything from you willingly. Therefore, please quell this riot immediately, dispel the mob's delusions, and deter those who are watching from the sidelines, itching for action. Schroeder nodded in agreement, saying, In this situation, even if their request is reasonable, you shouldn't agree. So, don't ask them, quell the riot first. My lord, please don't worry. They're just some villagers. A few fully armed knights can disperse them, let alone our rigorously trained army equipped with muskets and cannons. Paul opened his mouth slightly, surprised that his two usually respected elders would say such reactionary things. After thinking it over, Paul finally said, I order, first, notify the conscription stations in each village and town to organize the militia. The person in charge must keep abreast of the situation in their jurisdiction and not slacken. Second, dispatch 2 companies of troops to rush there overnight to cooperate with the Navy and internal security forces to isolate the riot area, and then, everyone waited for their lord to utter the word suppression, then issue an ultimatum to the rioters, ordering them to immediately cease their actions, but forbidding them from attacking without my command. Hansel and the others were about to continue their persuasion when Paul interjected, Gentlemen, one night, give me one night. I will decide how to proceed. On the way out of the Lord's Manor, Hansel and Cecil discussed the events of the previous night. Did you notice that besides worrying about damaging his reputation for benevolence, the Earl seems to be afraid of something else? It seems so. Is he afraid the army can't defeat those rioters? That's absurd. Lord Scrutter said a few knights could disperse them. By the way, Cecil, why didn't we see our beautiful head of education and the advisor? They are also members of the Council of State. Didn't you inform them? Riots are too cruel to women. It's best not to disturb them. Oh? Is that all? Well, I admit it. Cecil shrugged. I was afraid that the two ladies' personalities and opinions would interfere with the Earl's judgment. Your concerns are valid. Chapter 267 Suppression. The night passed without incident. The next morning, Paul, his eyes bloodshot and red, announced his next course of action. If the rioters refused the ultimatum, he authorized the martial law troops to use all available means to quell the uprising, including the use of muskets and cannons. Since those involved in the riot had lost their minds, it was unlikely they could be appeased without causing loss of life. Having assumed the position of a feudal lord, one must act with the awareness of a feudal lord. Even if defeat was inevitable, he would not die like that locksmith king, humiliated by his subjects for constantly compromising and yielding. Paul encouraged himself in this way. The government and the army praised the Lord's wise decision, and the arrival of Godwin and other salt works owners further solidified his resolve. Your Excellency, you must stand up for us. Godwin and the others threw themselves to the ground, wailing. Their clothes were disheveled, showing they had rushed to Lake Town overnight. Those rioters destroyed our salt works by the sea. They even killed many workers. Please, you must send troops to arrest them and hang them all. Amidst the saltworks owners' sobbing cries, Paul realized the situation was escalating. Your naval commander insisted on waiting for your order before deploying troops. We had no choice but to come and beg you. Godwin's tone revealed his strong dissatisfaction with Austin. If he had been more flexible, the riot would have been nipped in the bud, and he wouldn't have suffered such heavy losses. Report. Lakeside Town has authorized us to use all available means to quell this riot. Captain Quake, who is personally leading the sailors to block the roads, received a written order from the messenger. Last night, they received orders from Lakeside Town via Harpoon to isolate the riot area and await further instructions. The Navy mobilized urgently, splitting into warships, each with over 100 men, to block all the roads. All personnel assemble. With Quake's command, the sailors on the south quickly formed ranks. Our next target is Faber Village. According to orders, we must restore order there as soon as possible. Quake waved his hand. Let's go. Kevin stood atop the tower of Landlord Bodden's house, gazing out onto the main road outside the village. His companions in the yard were excitedly slaughtering pigs and sheep to prepare food for the new day, but he couldn't feel happy at all. Things had completely exceeded his expectations. He couldn't help but recall. After the villagers drove away the first group of tax collectors, Landlord Bodden quickly sent a second group. This group was even more ferocious, carrying knives, guns, and clubs. They threatened the villagers, saying they would teach them a lesson if they continued to resist paying taxes. The exchange between the two sides grew increasingly tense, and it was unclear who started it, but it eventually escalated into physical confrontation. And once the physical conflict began, it couldn't be stopped. The villagers' long-accumulated resentment erupted in an instant, and the usually docile villagers suddenly displayed a violent side. Although Bodden's tax-collecting team arrived with great fanfare, they were outnumbered by the villagers. Soon, more than half of them fell, and the rest fled, wounded and desperate. After a brief moment of cheers, everyone was unsure what to do next. Kevin, his blood boiling from the recent events, jumped onto the platform and shouted, "Gentlemen, we've completely broken ties with Bodden now. He'll definitely send more people to coerce us. So I propose that instead of passively waiting for his men, we should take the initiative and go to him. Let him explain what this war tax is all about. He can't produce any decree from the Lord's mansion. He's secretly imposing a new tax behind the Lord's back. Even if the Lord's mansion sends people to investigate, we have a case to argue with." Someone asked, "Kevin, are you sure Bodden is secretly imposing a new tax?" This question made everyone tense. They had only heard Kevin confidently claim that Bodden was illegally collecting taxes behind the Lord's back. None of them had considered whether it was true. Kevin said confidently, "Don't worry, everyone. I've been to Lake Town so many times, and I've never heard of any other place collecting war taxes. Bodden must be lying to us, but that's Lord Bodden, the biggest landowner in the area. His family is very powerful." After driving away the tax collectors, many people's anger had dissipated, and fear and worry about the landowner once again filled their hearts. "Villagers," Kevin shouted angrily at their lack of resolve. "Do you think Bodden will let this go? No, absolutely not. He'll definitely seek revenge, and he'll meticulously fabricate charges against us, gathering even more henchmen to deal with us. We must take advantage of his moment before he realizes what's happening and proactively confront and negotiate with him. We need to force him to agree to a deal where he's in the wrong, reducing the taxes to a level we can afford." Someone asked, "But wasn't the Lord's decision to collect taxes made by him?" Kevin explained, "I've told you before, Bodden is just a tax collector. He's contracted to collect taxes in this area. The Lord's mansion only collects a fixed amount from him periodically, but the actual taxes he collects from us far exceed what he pays to the Lord's mansion. The difference naturally goes into his own pocket." Seeing that people were still hesitating, Kevin anxiously urged, "We've already beaten him up. What are you still hesitating about? We've finally caught Bodden guilty of something. We must seize this opportunity to force him to lower the taxes, or we will go to Lake Town to sue him." Someone asked, "Then why don't we just go to Lake Town and report him?" Kevin explained, "It's Bodden who set up the illegal tax. If the Lord changes the tax collector, we won't have any bargaining chips with a new one. All crows are black, and the new tax collector will definitely want to make a fortune off us. It's better to keep Bodden around, agreeing not to expose him and allowing him some profit in exchange for us paying less tax." "Good idea. I think this method will work," More and more people began to support Kevin, and gradually everyone sided with him. There was no other way. If there was any other way to survive, no one wanted to offend that big landowner. But recently, making a living had become increasingly difficult, and now they were being burdened with an additional war tax that didn't even exist. How were they supposed to survive? Rather than starve to death, they might as well take a gamble. Seeing that his suggestion had gained everyone's support, Kevin arranged for people to carry the unconscious Bodden family thugs lying on the ground away for treatment. Although he hated these lackeys, they were important witnesses and couldn't just die like that. Someone suggested, Bodden's family is powerful and he employs many thugs. Our village alone is a bit weak. But other villages are also oppressed by him. Why not persuade them to join us and settle scores with Bodden? This was a good idea and quickly gained unanimous approval. Let's go and demand an explanation. Let's find that swindler and get to the bottom of this. Such voices echoed from the crowd. So a large group of able-bodied men set off, and people from the villages they passed through joined them. Chapter 268 Out of Control. But upon arriving in Faber village, the situation unfolded in a way Kevin hadn't anticipated. He was right about one thing: the landowner, Bodden, wasn't prepared for his next move. Kevin led the villagers to surround Bodden's house, demanding that Bodden come out to negotiate in person. The residents of Faber village had never seen anything like this before. They assumed whoever dared to surround Bodden's house must be some powerful figures, and they were all terrified, hiding in their homes. Bodden's gates were tightly shut, but inside, he still kept many servants and thugs. Armed with weapons and household items like sticks and hoes, they stood atop the walls protecting the house. The Bodden family, as the largest landowner in the area and having committed many unethical acts, were extremely concerned with their own security, building their residence like a small fortress, with walls large enough for people to stand on. Kevin led the villagers to shout outside the wall for a long time, but their target, the landlord Bodden, still did not show up. However, his steward, a fat man with a waistline that was no less than his master's, slowly climbed onto the top of the wall. The steward arrogantly declared, "You not only refuse to pay your taxes honestly, but you also injured Lord Bodden's men, and you even dare to come to Faber village to cause trouble." Kevin and the others were enraged by his attitude and roared, "Let Bodden come out and talk to us." The steward scoffed, "Insolence! Do you think you lowly commoners can just see Lord Bodden as you please? I advise you to stop dreaming. Go home obediently, prepare your taxes, and pay them honestly. Perhaps Lord Bodden will take pity on you and pardon your tax resistance." Kevin shouted, "HMPH. We've already discovered your crime of unilaterally establishing a war tax. Ridiculous. Lord Bodden is only acting according to the Lord's orders, then show us the Lord's decree." Nonsense. The Lord's decree is not something you can read. If you can't produce the decree, it's fake. We should have reported you, but if you lower the poll tax according to our conditions, we can refrain from reporting you to the Lord's mansion. The butler, somewhat incredulous at Kevin and the others' demands, then, with an exaggerated expression, put his hand to his ear and said, "What? Speak louder, I can't hear you. Stop playing dumb. Get Bodden out here right now. Otherwise, we'll really report him to Lake Town." Ho ha ho ha. You guys have provided me with a day's worth of laughs, a bunch of lowly commoners. Ho ha ho ha. The butler burst into laughter, but his repeated use of lowly commoners enraged the crowd outside the wall. Ouch! A cry of pain rang out as a stone struck the butler's forehead, drawing blood. Anger quickly replaced his previous smile, and the butler pointed at the crowd, cursing, You have some nerve. Kill this lackey." The angry crowd hurled more and more stones. The butler frantically ordered those behind him, "Quick! Disperse these lowly commoners." A group of people quickly appeared on the wall, also wielding slingshots, and began launching stones into the crowd. The villagers had no idea that someone inside was equipped with slingshots. A large number of people were hit and suffered, their heads bleeding profusely. They were packed tightly together outside the wall. The slingshots required little aim, and some hit in the head and other vital areas lay on the ground, their fates unknown. The crowd descended into chaos, followed by collective rage. "Kill these scoundrels," they roared, throwing everything they could find at the top of the wall. The stone-throwing battle continued for a while, with people on both sides being hit intermittently. The anger of those outside the wall grew stronger and stronger. Someone shouted, "Kill these bastards. Let's rush in and drag Bodden out." No one noticed that someone had somehow produced two ladders from somewhere. They simply appeared, and the ladders were quickly placed against the wall. The enraged villagers climbed the ladders and grappled with Baden's guards. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Kevin regained his composure and shouted to the people rushing over the wall, "Just subdue them, don't kill anyone," but his voice was drowned out by the clamor. It seemed no one heard him, or didn't care to. People shouted and yelled, and more climbed ladders to the top of the wall. The guards on the wall were quickly subdued. Seeing they were at a disadvantage, most of the guards jumped down and ran into the courtyard. Those who couldn't escape could only crouch down, covering their heads. But the angry crowd seemed unwilling to let these lackeys go, continuing to punch and kick them. Those who had crossed the wall opened the gate from the inside, and the people outside rushed in. Kevin climbed onto the wall and, with great effort, managed to stop those still retaliating against the guards, but those who hadn't escaped were already dead. Sigh, he sighed, then stood on the wall and loudly appealed to the villagers who were still rushing into the courtyard to calm down. But it was no use. The people stormed into the courtyard, slamming open the doors of every room, dragging out the people inside and beating them indiscriminately. In their irrational eyes, everyone in the mansion was evil. The enraged mob quickly searched the entire mansion, inside and out, but couldn't find Baden or the steward. They then tied up the servants, forcing them to reveal Baden's whereabouts, but to no avail. During the search, something unexpected happened. Someone discovered a room with several chests. When the chests were opened, the glittering gold inside stunned everyone. The chests were filled with handfuls of silver and copper coins. These people, who had been poor for generations, had never seen so much money before. After a collective stunned silence of half a minute, the first person to react rushed forward, grabbing a handful of money and stuffing it into his pocket, then a second, a third. But he was quickly pushed aside, and the crowd surged forward, jostling to grab the money and stuff it into their own pockets. Those searching elsewhere also arrived at the scene, and the several boxes of money were quickly divided up, with many people even fighting over the loot. When not a single coin remained in the boxes, those who arrived later were filled with regret, lamenting that they hadn't found the place first. But they soon discovered a way to make up for their disappointment. Although the money was gone, there were still many other belongings in the mansion. Then the chaos truly began. People started ransacking the mansion, stuffing anything that seemed valuable into bags. The commotion at the Baden mansion quickly reached the ears of the villagers of Faber. It was a complete shock. The arrogant Master Baden had been driven away. A group of outsiders were ransacking his house. After the initial shock came resentment. How could they let those outsiders get away with it? No, we deserve a share of Baden's wealth too. This landlord has always exploited us. So the villagers of Faber also stormed into the mansion. Intimidated by the audacity of the previous intruders, they dared not demand the already divided loot, and instead began plundering what remained. Furniture was moved, dismantled, and even granite bricks they had never seen before were knocked off piece by piece and taken away. The servants abandoned by Baden suffered greatly, forced to hand over their money. Faber was a large village, inhabited by the Baden family for generations, with several independent branches, and other wealthy households in the village also suffered. Only Kevin stood dumbfounded at the gate, on the verge of tears. This wasn't what he had imagined. When people lost their minds, he tried to stop his companions from running amok, but to no avail. Even he himself felt a burning impulse rising within him as he saw others taking large sums of money, barely managing to suppress the desire. What should he do next? Kevin panicked. Chapter 269 Incitement. The rivalry, or rather, chaos, continued until evening, when everyone was exhausted and the area around Faber village finally quieted down. Although physically tired, everyone's spirits were high. Each person had found quite a few good things. The crowd gathered at the Baden family mansion, boasting about their day's haul. They planned to rest for a while before returning to their own villages. Only Kevin had taken nothing. He anxiously gathered several of the more respected members of the village together. He expressed his concerns. Their rampage in Faber village would surely be punished by the Lord. The crowd felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over them. Their previously fiery enthusiasm instantly cooled. When resentment accumulated to a certain threshold, impulse overwhelmed reason, leading them to do things they wouldn't normally dare. However, they forgot that a higher being maintained order in Alda, even though that order oppressed them. Someone stammered, but, wasn't it Baden who made the mistake first? He even killed our men, and several of those hit by the slingshot never woke up again. Kevin shook his head. but clearly our crime is more serious. The Lord will definitely punish us first when he finds out." He felt a surge of resentment, resenting the villagers for their impulsiveness and their inability to be rational. While everyone was frantically looting, Kevin had considered running away to Fland Harbor to report to the town hall and request the mayor to send people to maintain order. However, after much deliberation, he decided to stay and wait for everyone to calm down so they could come up with a solution together. "Haha, brother Kevin, what crime? You're exaggerating." Just as everyone was frowning, a voice came from the side. A shifty-eyed man approached, and Kevin's frown deepened. He recognized the man, Peso, the village's lazy, good-for-nothing scoundrel. It was the landlord Bodden who first secretly imposed heavy taxes behind the Lord's back, forcing us to the brink of starvation, which is why he did such an irrational thing. Besides, so many of us were involved. "Haven't you heard the saying, the law does not punish the masses?" Kevin pointed out seriously. The current Lord is a powerful man, as can be seen from how he overcame all sorts of difficulties to wipe out the pirates. Peso shook his finger. "Even if he wants to investigate, what can he do to us? Hang us all? Or arrest us all for forced labor? We've gathered the able-bodied men from several villages. If he arrests us all, what will happen to the elderly, women, and children in the villages? Will he take care of us?" Everyone looked at Peso. What the kid said seemed to make some sense. Would the Lord bear a reputation for cruelty for a heartless landowner? What will the bard say about him? The villagers were driven to rebellion by the landowner, and the count indiscriminately hanged all the rebels. The crowd nodded in agreement. This lad, who spent his days loafing around instead of working, had unexpectedly accumulated quite a bit of knowledge. His words eased their worries about their lives considerably. Just as their brows relaxed, Peso's expression turned serious. "However, our spoils today will certainly be confiscated and returned to Bodden, or into the Lord's own pocket." His words made everyone clutch their bags tightly. "No one can take the treasures from my bag," someone immediately shouted. They were terrified of poverty, suddenly gaining wealth. They were willing to risk their lives to protect it. Kevin covered his forehead. He already had a premonition of something bad. Sure enough, Peso waved his fist and said, "Gentlemen, why don't we negotiate with the Lord? The ill-gotten wealth of the Bodden family is accumulated through the daily exploitation of the people. We have the right to possess this wealth, because it was originally stolen from us by Bodden. Now it's simply returning it to its rightful owner." "Enough," Kevin retorted angrily. "What do we have to negotiate with the Lord? He can summon an army to deal with us." "Kevin, you're such a coward," Peso refuted him righteously. "We outnumber them and have seized a large number of weapons from the Bodden family. We are an army in ourselves. Of course we have the capital to negotiate with the Lord. Have you forgotten how the pirates of the Northwest Bay were wiped out? Then do you remember the former pirate captain Edward? He was a figure feared by all the lords of the Northwest." Peso ignored Kevin. Their argument had already attracted a large crowd. He shouted to those around him, "How did the pirates of Edward's time instill fear in the lords? There's only one secret: unity. They banded together, gaining strength far exceeding that of individuals. After Edward disappeared, the pirates scattered, which is why they were defeated one by one. Folks, we've gathered people from several villages. As long as we unite, the Lord can't do anything to us. He will eventually accept our demands and allow us to keep the wealth that rightfully belongs to us. Gentlemen, the fall of Bodden has already proven our strength. Look, even a large landowner like him can't withstand the power of our unity." Peso's words ignited a passion in the crowd. Yes, the usually arrogant landowner Bodden, under their combined strength, had become a timid, fleeing dog. A lord? Isn't a lord just a larger landowner? These villagers, who usually only frequented the vicinity of their village and had never ventured beyond the port of Fran, had no idea the true size of an earldom, its population, or the size of its army. They could only speculate based on the most powerful force they had ever encountered, the Bodden family. They had easily driven away the landowner Bodden. If their lord disagreed with their demands and sent an army, defeating the lord's forces might be more difficult, given that they were even more powerful than Bodden. So the villagers shouted, "Unite! Negotiate with the Lord," because Ardalak knights, lower-level feudal lords whose territories were villages, the peasants living in the countryside had no direct experience of the Lord's power. Their obedience to the Lord's decrees stemmed more from generations of ingrained habits. In other territories, the probability of something like what happened in Faber would be very low, as villagers would be suppressed by the knights residing in their own village as soon as they gathered, and there would be no opportunity for multiple villages to coordinate their actions. Chapter 270. Kevin barely slept a wink, his mind in turmoil over whether to flee or stay and fight alongside the others against the Lord's army. Ultimately, he decided to stay and stand with them. Kevin was almost certain the Lord's Manor would send troops to suppress them. It was only a matter of time. After agreeing to negotiate with the Lord the previous day, while they were quite confident in their strength, they knew the upcoming struggle wouldn't be easy. To gain a greater advantage, they encamped in Fade Village. As their own village lacked any decent defensive structures, the fortifications used to resist the pirates had been dismantled after their defeat. The only defensive building they could find was the Bodden family mansion, practically a small castle. To prevent their families still at home from being implicated, they sent messengers back to the village that night, instructing those remaining to seek refuge in nearby forests or seaside caves for a few days, the same thing they had done when the village learned of the pirates' approach before the new lord's ascension. The aroma of roasting meat wafted from below the tower, and the courtyard filled with laughter and chatter. After Bodden's escape, his livestock, including cattle and sheep, were naturally taken over by the villagers, who slaughtered pigs and sheep every day, allowing those who rarely ate meat to feast. However, Kevin had no appetite. He had a feeling something bad was about to happen. At dawn, he volunteered for the watch, remaining atop the tower until someone brought him bread, which he hastily ate a couple of bites of. They had gathered nearly 1,000 men. Perhaps, maybe, they had a chance? Kevin repeatedly tried to convince himself that since he had decided to stay and fight alongside everyone, he needed to give himself some hope. Around 10 a.m., Kevin's fears finally came true. A force appeared in his field of vision. He almost immediately recognized it as the Lord's army. Having frequently traveled to Fland Harbor, Kevin had witnessed the sailors' drills. Their tight formations and synchronized steps were the result of extensive training. Clang. 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 Kevin immediately rang the bell on the tower, the agreed-upon alarm signal. The resounding chimes threw the courtyard into chaos. Although the villagers were mentally prepared to confront the Lord's army, fear gripped their hearts as the moment approached. Don't panic. Take your positions, hold your weapons. Stay calm. Stay calm, we are strong. We are invincible. The hastily chosen commanders of the previous night kept urging their men on, though they themselves were somewhat apprehensive. After a period of commotion, the courtyard finally quieted down, and everyone watched the army outside from the walls. The enemy was now lined up in neat rows facing the mansion's gate. Knight, you must do us justice. Hang those rioters. Help us reclaim our property. Several wealthy villagers from Faber surrounded Quake, weeping and wailing. Kevin and his gang of outsiders had stirred up some of the bolder locals in Faber village, but they could only pick up scraps after entering the Bodden mansion. Once emotions are stirred, they are hard to calm down, and these unsatisfied individuals set their sights on other wealthy households in the village. Fearing retaliation, these opportunists have now joined the mansion's resistance. All right, gentlemen, the Lord will certainly give you a fair judgment, Quark said, ordering his men to invite the wealthy households away. Then, he had a loud-voiced soldier shout through a megaphone at the people on the wall, "This is an ultimatum from the Lord's mansion. Those inside, lay down your weapons and surrender immediately to the Lord's judgment, or we will treat you like enemies." A reply came from the wall, "We want to talk to the Lord, we have some conditions we hope he will agree to." What? These rioters want to negotiate with the Lord's mansion? Several naval officers chuckled. "We'll repeat ourselves, surrender immediately and unconditionally, we won't leave until the Lord agrees. Send someone with influence to talk to us, we promise not to harm him." Captain Quake frowned and remained silent, recalling his life motto from his pirate days. Seeing the captain lost in thought, the first mate coughed loudly and said, "Captain, the riders have rejected the ultimatum. We can attack. The soldiers are ready, and reconnaissance has found no ambushes." Oh, Quake snapped out of his reverie, then, as if having made a decision, shouted, "Attack!" The naval soldiers, lined up in a horizontal column, marched towards the Bodden family's walls. They carried ladders to help them scale the 2-meter-high wall. Among them were Kevin Alfred, a naval officer cadet. Their superiors felt it was time for these youngsters to experience the atmosphere of battle, and suppressing the weak and ineffective rioters was a good opportunity. "Why don't you surrender? Why don't you surrender?" Though his steps were firm, the young cadet's heart was conflicted. Alan himself came from a salt farming family, So he believed more that these salt farmers were being exploited by landlords and forced to fight back than that they were simply resisting taxes. Having grown up surrounded by salt production, he naturally knew the immense impact the emergence of salt fields would have on the traditional salt-making industry. However, his long-trained obedience made him choose to follow orders and attack the salt farmers. The people on the wall, seeing the army ignoring their demands and advancing towards them, panicked. "What's the rush? Can't you see they only have a mere 100 men? We outnumber them several times over," the commanders shouted to their comrades. "Slingshot them, slash them with swords." Scattered stones flew towards the naval soldiers, hitting many. The officers were disappointed. Had it not been for the urgent need to reach the riot site quickly, they would have brought artillery. A few shots would have been enough to blast through the crumbling wall. Spread out, run. The opposing force was a disorganized rabble, barely maintaining a tight formation. The slingshot's accuracy plummeted to almost zero. The sailors sprinted towards the wall, the first soldiers firing a volley that kept the defenders from peeking out. Those behind them lit grenades and hurled them into the courtyard. After the explosions and screams erupted from within, the sailors, without waiting for ladders, scrambled to the top of the wall in a human pyramid fashion. The battle ended quickly. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271. When news of the quelled riots reached Lakeside, Paul was still somewhat incredulous. It was over? So easily resolved? Paul had prepared for the worst. Peasants everywhere would rise up, overthrowing his tyrannical rule in an instant, forcing him to flee in disgrace to a neighboring ally's territory. Chief of Staff Schroeder, seeing the Earl's expression, coughed lightly. "Ahem, Your Excellency, please allow me to report the details." He still didn't understand what the Lord had been so worried about these past 2 days. It was just a bunch of rioters, wasn't it? Schroeder's so-called details were quite simple. Each unit sealed off the roads, and upon receiving Lakeside's ultimatum, immediately moved into the riot-stricken areas to restore order. Elsewhere, it was just small-scale fighting, nothing more than local ruffians taking advantage of the chaos. Only the riots around Faber village reached a significant scale. The largest landowner's house was breached, and all his possessions were looted. The mob occupied the courtyard, intending to put up a stubborn resistance and force the Lord's mansion to pardon their crimes and acknowledge their ownership of the looted property through force. The loyal and brave naval officers and men, of course, were not swayed by this. After the ultimatum was rejected, the sailors immediately launched an attack and suppressed the mob in the courtyard in just 1 hour. "That's it, Your Excellency. What are our casualties?" 6 men were slightly injured by slingshots, and 1 twisted his ankle while scaling the wall. "No casualties, no casualties, and the enemy, that mob, 23 dead, 30 wounded." Paul relaxed completely, leaning back in his chair, closing his eyes and exhaling. "To be honest, Schroeder, I didn't expect things to go so smoothly. Your Excellency, you must understand, the disparity in strength between the two sides was enormous. The enemy was nothing more than a group of disorganized, undisciplined villagers. After the sailors scaled the wall, the mob did try to organize resistance, but after bayonets killed a few of the vanguard, the rest scattered, either running around like headless flies or cowering on the ground, trembling with fear. The Navy sent a small detachment to block the back gate, so they were all captured by us. What should we do next? You are the Lord, it's all up to you. Let Cecil find out the cause and effect of this riot first." Upon receiving Paul's order, Cecil immediately began interrogating the prisoners. After several days and nights of torture, the people of Lakeside Town figured out the cause of the riot. It started when the tax farmer bought and arbitrarily established a war tax. The salt farmers, whose livelihoods were increasingly strained due to the establishment of the saltworks, simply couldn't afford the new tax, leading to conflict with the tax collectors sent by Baden. Due to long-standing resentment, the conflict quickly escalated, and the salt farmers, blinded by rage, went directly to Baden's village of Faber, finally turning into a riot. Baden's arbitrary establishment of the war tax was confirmed, as several servants of the Baden family rescued from the salt farmers, those he had sent to collect the taxes, all confessed to it. "That damned landlord," Paul cursed in a language Cecil couldn't understand, right in front of him. "My lord, What did you just say? Cecil asked cautiously, clearly seeing that the Count was very angry. Ah. It's all right, please continue. What's strange is that the rioters confessed to everything else, but no one admitted to any involvement in the attack on the saltworks, nor did they admit any connection to the riots elsewhere. Oh, Paul tapped his fingers lightly on the table. What do you think? Cecil replied, my lord, they are most likely not lying. I isolated them and interrogated them one by one. I don't believe this rabble has the ability to coordinate their stories so quickly. Paul nodded. Yes, I think so too, Cecil continued. Several riots of varying degrees occurred during that period. According to the investigation, it seems someone was deliberately spreading rumors about Faber Village, inciting people in other places, and many people took advantage of the chaos. Paul was indignant. How could these people do this? Haven't I, as their lord, been good enough to them? My lord, don't rush to self-reflect. Considering the attack on the saltworks, it's obvious. Paul suddenly interrupted him as if he had discovered a new continent. I understand, Cecil. Cecil swallowed back what he was about to say and looked at Paul. Paul stood up anxiously and said, a conspiracy. Isn't it clear? Cecil, this is a conspiracy. Cecil's eyes widened, and he tried to feign surprise. A conspiracy? You mean, Paul explained, someone must be manipulating all of this behind the scenes. Considering we're at war with the usurper Maltz Kent, it's very likely he's the one pulling the strings, deliberately inciting my people to cause trouble. And that, secret society, it's not impossible either, the intelligence chief suddenly realized, slapping his thigh. I see, Your Excellency, you're as wise as ever. Paul sat back down indignantly. This is utterly shameless, despicable, and vile. They can't beat us on the battlefield, so they resort to underhanded tactics. I despise people like that the most, Cecil said. Your Excellency, if you agree, I can repay them in kind. Paul snorted. I wouldn't stoop to such low tactics. Schroeder, hearing the Lord call his name, the chief of staff sitting beside him immediately responded, yes, Your Excellency, immediately draft a new battle plan. I want the frontline troops to resume their offensive immediately, and send new troops to support them. We must defeat them fair and square, the old knight calmly replied. Your Excellency, I know you are currently angry, but I still advise you not to act rashly. We don't know if similar riots will occur again, so for the time being, we should keep our troops at home. The 2 battalions in the newly occupied territory must prioritize maintaining local order. After all, that area used to be Kent's territory. It's much easier for them to cause trouble there than in other areas. Moreover, it's not certain that the Kent family was behind this. Damn it, Paul slammed his fist on the table and roared at the intelligence chief. Bring that Baden guy over here. I want to have a good discussion with this landowner about his so-called war tax. Chapter 272 Punishment. Landlord Baden was led into the main hall of the Lord's mansion. He was a portly middle-aged man with a round face and small, beady eyes. Although he tried to appear as if he had suffered a great calamity, a few greedy glints occasionally flashed in his eyes. Upon entering the hall, he performed the proper greeting of a commoner meeting his lord. Honorable and great Earl Gleman, your loyal subject Baden has come at your summons. The young lord, seated at the head of the hall, remained silent after hearing his words, simply staring at him blankly. Baden's heart tightened, a sense of foreboding washed over him. Oh no, had the lord found out about the war tax? The hall was silent, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Paul remained silent, and Baden could only stand there, waiting awkwardly. You are Baden, the lord finally spoke, and Baden almost collapsed to the ground, his legs giving way. For someone of his stature and accustomed to a life of luxury, standing for long periods was exhausting. Yes, Your Excellency Earl Gleman, I am Baden. Where have you been all this time? Did you return home after the riots subsided? Thank you for your concern, Your Excellency. I was hiding in a secluded farmhouse in the fields. I have returned home. Ah, my house is a complete mess. Everything has been looted, and several honest and loyal servants have been killed. As he spoke of the riots, Baden's face grew increasingly bitter, and he began to recount the atrocities committed by the salt workers. Paul did not stop him, letting Baden continue. It's all those damned paupers' fault, Earl Gleman. You must uphold the Lord's justice and fairness, and hang all these lawless beasts. They're nothing but living animals. Seeing that the Lord had no reaction, Baden's voice trailed off as he continued his accusations. Ahem. Your Excellency Earl Gleman, please, You must give us good people justice, and restore peace to the land of Arda." Baden concluded with these words, and the hall finally returned to its previous silence. Paul then asked, "Then tell me about this so-called war tax." "War tax? What war tax? Never heard of it." "Oh? Didn't you levy a war tax on the salt workers?" Baden feigned innocence, saying, "Your Excellency, please don't believe those thugs' lies. They'll fabricate any lie to lessen their crimes and gain your sympathy. For these poor bastards, shame and honor are meaningless." Paul sneered, "But Baden, it's not just the salt workers who said you levied a war tax. Bring them here." As soon as he finished speaking, a guard led several men into the hall. Baden nearly fainted when he saw them. Weren't these the thugs he'd sent to collect the taxes? How were they still alive? Shouldn't they have been killed by those thugs long ago? These thugs all had their heads bowed, their faces bruised and swollen, clearly having suffered greatly at the hands of the salt workers. Paul smiled slightly and asked, "Baden, do you know them?" Baden hurriedly replied, "No, no. Your Excellency, I don't know these people." Paul turned his gaze to the thugs. "Baden says he doesn't know you. Then do you know him?" The man at the front said, "Your lordship, he is our former master, Baden." Baden hurriedly protested, "Nonsense. Your lordship, please don't believe them." Paul glared at him sternly, "Enough. I'll tell you when to speak." This frightened the landowner, making his fat tremble. He then questioned the thugs. "So tell me, did Baden send you to collect war taxes besides the poll tax?" The man who had spoken earlier glanced at Baden and honestly replied, "Yes, a group of men was sent before us to collect poll taxes and war taxes, but they were driven back. Then Lord Baden sent us, and told us to teach the salt workers a lesson." Paul glared at Baden. "What else do you have to say?" Baden was sweating profusely, convulsing, but still managed to defend himself. They've been bought off by the mob. They're in cahoots now." "So you did lie to me earlier? These people were indeed your former subordinates." Lord, please understand." Paul chuckled, "I have some more men here for you to see. Bring them in." The guards led in another group of people, all dressed as ordinary villagers. Paul asked, "Could Baden have collected war taxes from you?" At the Lord's words, the villagers became agitated. "Lord Gleman, you're right, he is indeed forcing us to pay war taxes. When your father and grandfather were in power, we never heard of any war taxes. Our income was already meager, and with Baden's messing things up, life has become even harder." The villagers complained vehemently. They knew Baden was lying to them, and their resentment was palpable. Looking at Baden's ashen face, Paul slowly picked up his water glass and took a sip. "Baden, these are residents of several villages in your assigned area, and they are all law-abiding citizens who haven't participated in the riots. What do you have to say for yourself now?" Baden's lips trembled. Suddenly, his eyes widened, gleaming with a sharp light. "Lord Gleman, the reason I was bewitched and blinded by greed is all because of that Hansel abbot under your command? Oh? Why are you suddenly bringing him up?" Baden accused him as if he were going to throw caution to the wind. "That damned Crystal Radiance guy, what kind of damned land transfer is that? He swapped large tracts of my good land for bad land. Relying on the Lord's mansion for support, he's wielding his power like a tiger, and he's really screwed over us honest, hard-working landowners and gentry. Besides you, are the others also dissatisfied with him?" "Yes, Lord Gleman," Baden said urgently, "many people are dissatisfied with him. We secretly call him the skin-peeling baron. Please, you must uphold justice, remove and punish this incompetent agricultural supervisor, and quell everyone's resentment. In land swaps, exchanging good land for bad land is inevitable. With quality and area intertwined, no one can strike the perfect balance. Moreover, for large landowners like Baden, the gains far outweigh the losses. Now his farmland is contiguous, making large-scale planting and irrigation easier. He's bought several harvesters. But most people are concerned about their losses, taking their gains for granted. Furthermore, Baden's resentment towards Hansel is actually focused on another matter. During the land reclamation, a large area of public land his family had encroached upon was discovered. This cost Baden a large sum of money and a large area of land he believed rightfully belonged to him. However, Baden also knew he had broken the law first. Wouldn't it be foolish to speak out now? So he only pointed the finger at the land swap. A barely perceptible hint of relief flashed across Paul's face as he continued, "What does this have to do with your private collection of war taxes?" Baden said. Feigning grievance, It's because I suffered such heavy losses in the land swap that I came up with this foolish idea, hoping to at least recoup some of it. No. This foolish idea wasn't my fault, it's all my butler's fault. He came up with a terrible idea. Baden suddenly remembered something and quickly changed his tune. Your butler? Where is he? He and I were hiding in a farmhouse in the fields, taking refuge. He went out to scout and never came back. He's probably been killed by the mob. Paul pondered. The butler? Missing? Interesting. He remembered the interrogation information Cecil had given him. When the salt miners surrounded the Baden family's mansion, it was the butler who first made sarcastic remarks, then ordered the servants to attack with slingshots, thus escalating the conflict. All right, Baden, I have no time for your nonsense. Regardless, levying war taxes behind the Lord's back is a violation of the law, and this riot was started because of you. Paul stood up, about to deliver his final decision. Baden knelt down with a thud. My lord, the Gleman family is known for its benevolence. Paul ignored his pleas and continued, you should have been given a very severe punishment, but given that your family has served the Lord for generations, I hereby declare, first, you are stripped of your tax farmer status. From now on, the tax collection in the areas you were responsible for will be handled by tax officials appointed by the state council. Second, half of your property will be confiscated to compensate for the losses caused by the riot, not including your own family's losses. Of course, Paul's words had barely finished when Baden, standing below, rolled his eyes and collapsed to the ground with a thud. The guards rushed forward to check on him, only to find his eyes narrowed to slits, only the whites of his eyes visible, foaming at the mouth, drool dripping from his mouth. He was unconscious. It seems that these two punishments have been a huge blow to him. Chapter 273. He's not dead, is he? Paul asked, looking at Baden, who was foaming at the mouth and lying motionless on the ground. After a careful examination, the guard replied, Sir, he's not dead, he's just unconscious. Drag him out, don't leave him here in the way. Yes, sir. Paul narrowed his eyes, carefully recalling what had just happened. The punishment of Baden was a test, to see how this representative figure among the landowners and gentry viewed the authority of his lord. The result was unexpectedly good. This local bully had fainted on the spot. In Paul's view, this meant that Baden knew he couldn't resist a lord's punishment. What was the situation a year ago? Pirates had invaded and killed the old lord, and then local bullies and highwaymen ran rampant, causing traffic jams and forcing the lord's decrees to only circulate around the vicinity of Lake Town. Paul thought to himself that if he had punished such a large landowner back then, Baden would definitely not have been so frightened, and might even have bargained with him. The suppression of pirates in the Northwest Gulf, the display of wealth from the development of industry and commerce, the courage to confront the powerful Kent family, and the Battle of Bitauberg, which brought fame in the Northwest, all restored the lord's authority in the earldom of Arda. This forced the landowners and gentry who had held power in the countryside for generations to treat the lord's orders with utmost care. Large landowners and tax farmers like Baden were practically lords in their own territories. Besides contracting tax collection, before Paul established a farmers' association and conscription station, all matters concerning the lord's corvée labor and military service had to pass through them. Baden's reaction gave Paul a further idea, to completely abolish the tax farming system under his rule. He had already considered this idea. At last year's year-end meeting, he wanted to abolish it immediately, but was dissuaded by Steward Ford. You must act calmly, making such a decision now is truly inappropriate. Steward Ford once again dissuaded Paul when he raised the issue again at the meeting. Why? Baden is a prominent landowner in Arda. If someone like him has submitted, who else would dare disobey my decrees? That's because you only punished Baden. Steward Ford stroked his beard and analyzed slowly. As the saying goes, the bigger the tree, the more the wind blows. With Baden's wealth, countless people secretly resent him. He's down on his luck because of his transgression, and others will only applaud or even kick him while he's down. But if you abolish all the tax farmers with a single decree, you'll be shaking the collective interests of all of them. They'll be desperate. In this sensitive period when we are at war with the Kent family, we should avoid trouble within Arda as much as possible, otherwise it will give external enemies an opportunity. Paul protested. Now that the Lord's mansion has a large army, do you think they would dare to rebel? I think a single battalion would be enough to deter them. Chief of Staff Schroeder coughed. Oh, Lord Griles, in this matter, forgive my bluntness, but I don't think the current army is very reliable. What do you mean by that? Schroeder? You've seen how excellent our trained army is. Paul stared intently at the chief of staff. The Arda army was his greatest pride. Aside from a minor setback in the early days against pirates, it had never disappointed him. Schroeder's words were like a bucket of cold water. Sir, I wasn't referring to combat effectiveness, the chief of staff said cautiously. Lord Gleman, as per your requirements, the educational background of officers in the Arda army is a crucial factor in their selection and promotion. However, within our army, those truly from ordinary families can barely write their own names before enlisting. They only begin basic literacy education after enlisting. This results in most of our officers being sons of landowners and gentry. You know, children from wealthy families always have an advantage in education compared to children from poor families. So, Paul understood Schroeder's meaning. Reality had once again poured cold water on his enthusiasm. Schroeder looked at him. The larger the family, the stronger the family ties. I think it will be difficult to guarantee the loyalty of those lower-ranking officers to abolish tax farming. In the worst case, they might do something irrational under the influence of their families. Furthermore, I must remind you that your previous abolition plan also falls under this category. It certainly cannot be rushed. Paul was somewhat frustrated. Schroeder was right. He himself recalled a saying from his previous life, those who are united in purpose will prevail. Even if those officers wouldn't directly rebel against him because of their oaths, would they still fight for him as fiercely as before when facing the enemy? Could such an army still be invincible? Isn't there any other way? Paul was very frustrated. Since ascending to the throne, he felt that everything he did was hindered by various constraints, requiring consideration of this and that. In fact, since his transmigration, he seemed to have accomplished nothing that could truly be called social change, which was truly tarnishing of his reputation as a transmigrator. Please wait until officers of commoner origin reach a certain proportion before you begin your reform plan. That proportion? I suggest no less than 3/5. But this will take time. Considering the need to maintain the army's combat effectiveness, we still have to rely heavily on officers from wealthy families, and formal education at the Gleman Military Academy has only just begun. I hope you will gradually increase the proportion of commoner children among the cadets. Yes, sir, I will keep that in mind. But I must also say that it is inappropriate to have children from poor families hold all the positions. As Lord, you must maintain a balance. I know that. Paul then asked the two men about the next course of action. According to the established plan, the army would distract the Kent family, while the Navy's warships would sail up the Weiss River to open a second front. Now, a riot has disrupted the plan. Chief Steward Ford and Chief of Staff Scudder both suggested focusing on internal stability, as no one could predict whether a second riot would occur. The final decision was that the 2 battalions under Bryce's command would remain stationed in the newly occupied territories, while the troops still stationed in Arda and Barden, including the Navy and Army, would be dispersed and deployed in various locations to suppress any unrest. An efficient communication system was essential. The current reliance on fast horses and birds to deliver urgent messages was neither timely nor reliable, severely hindering his control over the 2 earls' territories. Paul recalled his long-abandoned flag signal station plan. Chapter 274 Chap's Telegram. Mr. Burns, Betty, I need you to refine a feasible plan for me. In the Lord's office, Paul spoke eloquently to a drawing hanging on the wall. Guy Burns, Betty Diaz, Laddie Sisha, and others were also present in the room. The drawing depicted a stone tower, shaped like a watchtower, but strangely, a peculiar device stood atop it, a wooden frame with 2 bent arms extending from it. Guy Burns asked with great interest, and what new invention of yours is this? Oh, it's a remarkable thing, or rather, a remarkable system. I call it the emergency signal station, or the shackle signal system, used to transmit emergency information. Your Excellency, if I'm not mistaken, you intend to use the 2 arms on that wooden frame to create different shapes to convey different messages. Ah, Burns, you're a kindred spirit. Yes, the inspiration for this invention came from beacon fires, but as you know, beacon fires can only convey so much information, so I thought of semaphore, and after some modifications, it became this. You see, each shape represents a letter or a number, and then combining them forms a complete sentence or a complete paragraph. Paul, without batting an eye, introduced his invention. We build such a rapid reporting station at regular intervals, called a base station, where specialized personnel are stationed to receive signals from other rapid reporting stations. Starting from the first station, The information is passed down like a relay baton, station by station, until it reaches the final station. In the past, due to the limitations of human vision, building such a system was somewhat impractical, but with a telescope, it's entirely feasible. We only need to build a few rapid reporting stations to achieve information transmission over long distances. Burns exclaimed in admiration, "That's truly a remarkable invention. Did Paul invent this?" Of course not. The true inventor of this optical telegraph was the Frenchman Claude Chappe. In northern France in 1791, Claude Chappe and his brother designed a long-distance optical telegraph system. They successfully transmitted a sentence 16 kilometers away in 4 minutes, much faster than the post horses and ships used at the time. This was a completely manual system. Signalmen stationed inside manipulated the indicator arms according to specific rules. Each time the indicator arm of the signal tower formed a certain shape, it meant that a signal had been sent. Different signal stations would relay the signal, thus transmitting the message. Compared to a real telegraph, the information transmission efficiency was extremely touching. A skilled operator could only output a maximum of 3 signals per minute. According to statistics, a complete message at that time consisted of an average of 36 signals, meaning that even if the entire system used the best operators, this system could only transmit 0.083 messages per minute. If it was windy, rainy, or the operator was in a bad mood, whether the message would be sent was a matter of luck. However, even this frustrating signal transmission system was far more efficient than human hand-carrying at the time. It developed into an industry, serving governments and enterprises in peacetime. By 1840, France had built a 5,000-kilometer communication network with 356 base stations, and thousands of these telegraph towers had been built throughout Europe, making it arguably the first information superhighway. In Alexander Dumas' novel The Count of Monte Cristo, the Count bribes a telegraph operator to send incorrect information, causing Danglars to lose money in speculation and then withdraw all his money from Danglars' bank. Unable to pay, Danglars goes bankrupt. Paul is very fortunate that the world's language system is an alphabetic script similar to Latin. If it were like cuneiform, things would be truly difficult. Burns, I need you to set up an operating mechanism so that the telegraph operator can easily position the boom in different shapes. Burns stood up and bowed to Paul. I am honored to participate in your great invention. Haha, it's a great invention, Paul corrected him with a smile, then turned to Betty, the head of education. As for you, linguistics master, I need you to design a coding system. What shape represents what letter or number? Laddie, you are also a knowledgeable scholar, and I hope you can assist me. Laddie nodded in response. Yes, Lord Griles. Betty, however, remained silent, her expression rather charming. Her reaction puzzled Paul. He didn't seem to have offended her recently. Business is business, Paul continued. There are some other very important aspects, such as how to determine the start and end of a message, and how to verify its integrity. Another is congestion control. To give an analogy, when carriages come from different directions at an intersection, how do we ensure they can all pass smoothly? Furthermore, we call ordinary encoding plaintext, which can be used to transmit non-sensitive information that doesn't involve secrets. However, sensitive information needs to be encoded a second time on top of plaintext, or rather, encrypted. I don't want enemy spies to be able to figure out what classified information we're transmitting just by staking out our base stations every day. Seeing that the supervisor still didn't react, Paul said, "Oh, Betty, Burns is mainly responsible for the design of the operating devices. His focus is still on the development of new spinning machines, so I want you to be in charge of the overall system construction. How long do you think it will take to build a line from Le Port to Lakeside Town and then to Buchoya?" Betty, or rather Eileen, finally raised an eyebrow, and after a moment's thought, replied, "This requires experimentation, Your Excellency. We need to determine the optimal distance between the two base stations, through experiments, then determine the number, choose routes, estimate costs. Personnel training also takes time. I'll immediately speak to Steward Ford and make the construction of the emergency reporting system the top priority in our expenditures." After the saltworkers' riot a few days ago, Paul felt that the current speed of information dissemination was too slow. Once the crane signal system is completed, Lakeside Town will be able to perceive any disturbances within its territory relatively quickly, and orders issued by the Lord's Mansion can be rapidly transmitted to the local authorities. The means of information transmission are crucial to whether a regime can effectively control its territory. I urgently hope to complete the entire system spanning Arda, Bardine, and Northern Emden within 6 months. Eileen raised an eyebrow and said, I will work towards that goal, but Your Excellency, the prerequisite is that the officials of the Council of State don't treat me, the female head, as nothing. If everyone treats me like I'm invisible, nothing will get done, huh? Paul knew why this education head was throwing a tantrum. Apparently, she hadn't been notified of the emergency meeting held after the riot. Chapter 275. Eileen was actually somewhat reluctant to suppress the riots. If she had been notified to attend the meeting that night, she would have strongly urged Paul to first try persuasion and negotiation. Hansel and Cecil's concerns were valid in this regard. But what truly annoyed her was the attitude of the men towards her. During the riot suppression, as a high-ranking member of the State Council, she was once again excluded from the decision-making process and knew nothing about it from beginning to end. It wasn't until after the riots were quelled, and Chief of Staff Scrutter read the military report to everyone at the meeting, that Eileen was completely bewildered to learn what had happened. She remained silent and resentful throughout the meeting. Eileen felt like a decorative vase in the State Council, admired by the men when they had time, and immediately forgotten when a real emergency arose. Paul explained helplessly, Oh, my Lord Education Minister, you know the power of tradition is immense. Even I, as the Lord, can't change anything immediately. He put on an innocent expression. In truth, he hadn't even thought of calling Betty to the meeting that night. Eileen understood Paul in this respect. To withstand pressure from other men and allow a woman to oversee education was a rare act of enlightenment for this lord. Of course, this was also due to the fact that no one else besides the lord took education seriously. When his father, as king, entrusted his sister with government affairs, the resistance from the court officials was equally immense. HMPH. I'll shut those abbot bastards up sooner or later, Paul encouraged her. Good luck. So, my lord, how do you plan to deal with the rioting civilians? Oh, this is no small matter. Too many people are involved. It's obviously inappropriate for me to decide with a single word as before. Therefore, I've decided to select 5 excellent sheriffs from Arda and Bardin to serve as judges. They will form the Lord's Court to jointly try this matter. Cecil and Ruth Hayden will be responsible for investigating the actions of everyone involved in the riot and then submitting the results to the judges for review. The judges will then formulate reasonable punishments based on the severity of the crimes. That's more like it. Eileen's biggest fear was that Paul would sentence everyone involved in the riot to death with a single sentence. This kind of situation is all too common among local lords who hold military and political power. I also plan to establish the Lord's Court as a permanent institution, where it will handle all cases, large and small, within the territory. Aren't the local sheriffs adequate? It's unreasonable to concentrate law enforcement and judicial power in one person's hands. In the future, sheriffs, or rather, police officers, will only be able to arrest people, not convict them. The cases must be submitted to the court, and only after a judge has formally convicted the person can further punishment be imposed. I think this can, to some extent, prevent the abuse of power. Hearing Paul's explanation, Eileen nodded. That's a good improvement. Although the idea was appealing, Paul was troubled by how to centralize this power in the Lord's mansion. Like tax contracting, in those remote rural areas, private courts and private punishments by landowners and gentry were commonplace. When locals had disputes, their first thought wasn't to go to the Lord, but to seek help from a respected local figure. But he didn't have a powerful organization to immediately control the countryside. He could only change things slowly. The riots, which Paul named the April 15th incident, had a profound impact on him. Beyond simply building the telegraph system, he also strengthened the internal security forces and the public security department. As early as last year, the State Council established a public security department, led by Ruth Hayden, a former member of the internal security forces. However, due to financial and other factors, Ruth had essentially existed as a figurehead. Now, the State Council intended to make this department truly effective. Lakeside Town planned to establish a 2,000-strong police force within the next 5 years, replacing the old sheriff system to maintain order in various towns and, when appropriate, extend its power to the countryside. The internal security forces, originally established to protect offices and the personal safety of high-ranking personnel, were therefore small in size. Now, Paul intended to develop them into a force similar to the armed police of his previous life, a crucial component of public security, and its expansion was imperative. Another pressing issue is the livelihood of the salt workers by the sea. Unlike emerging industries like porcelain, canning, and paper-making, the emergence of salt works had a huge impact on the traditional salt-making industry, and without intervention, it would inevitably become the source of a new upheaval. Therefore, the State Council proposed two solutions. First, to guide the able-bodied young laborers among the salt workers to emerging industries. Second, to establish government-run salt works to employ the salt workers. However, due to the recent war and a series of new measures, the State Council did not have much spare money to establish any salt works. Therefore, at Paul's suggestion, the State Council only provided technical guidance, allowing the salt workers to build the salt works themselves, called collective salt works, with each household holding shares. To ensure fairness, the collective salt works were managed by personnel appointed by the State Council, and profits were distributed to the salt workers according to their shares. The interrogation of the rioters proceeded tensely and systematically. Considering that many were the main breadwinners of their families and that they had indeed been driven to desperation by Baden, most were reprimanded and sent home, but burdened with fines they might never be able to pay in their lifetime. The Lord's Court ultimately identified 50 individuals who could not be given lenient sentences. They were either guilty of robbery or murder of innocent people, or had instigated or led the riot. My lord, these are our preliminary sentences. Of these 50, all but one man named Peso, who is missing, are already in custody. Thomas, appointed chief judge of the Lord's Court, presented the verdict to Paul. Someone escaped. Yes, this Peso is highly suspicious. According to the salt workers, he was idle and dissolute, but after the riot broke out, he incited them to fight the Lord's army to the bitter end. After the battle, he disappeared. We suspect there might be something wrong with him. Let Cecil investigate this. I see some of them are quite young, not even 16 years old. Hanging them or sending them to decades of hard labor seems too harsh, Thomas said. You are the Lord, you can decide their fate. Paul pondered, let me consider these people further. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.